Chapter 855. Su Fengnian could almost only hear the sound of his own heavy breathing. Lu Haoshi's 3 questions caused his eardrums to vibrate, and it was as if a bell was ringing in his heart. Su Fengnian did not dare to cut off the telepathic connection with the red-robed otherworldly item. It was not because he was afraid of death, but because he was afraid that Su Ying would be stubborn and die before him. After breaking the wall and falling to the ground, he had a hidden thought. He hoped to use the opportunity to temper the purple-gold fate in Su Ying's body. Not only could he stall for time, but he could also let Su Ying recover her realm in advance. Unexpectedly, Master Lu Hao was a cunning old fox. Every step he took was full of mysteries. He only hurt Su Ying's skin but not her skin. He was indeed the old tortoise who had been hiding for the longest time in the celestial state. Su Fengnian turned over and lay flat in the pit. He forcibly cut off his connection with Su Ying's spirit and looked at the gray sky. His vision was blurry. Ever since he picked up the saber again, as long as he was determined to achieve something, he would advance step by step. He was afraid of death, so he did everything he could to cultivate the saber and nurture the sword. After reaching the first rank of Vajra, he obtained the Great Vajra, Pseudo-Finger Mystery, and used all his fate to enter Pseudo-Celestial State. He stumbled his way up and fell again and again. There were gains and losses, and he did not even have the time to be complacent. Now that he suddenly looked back, he realized that he had achieved many feats that he did not even dare to imagine before he started practicing the saber. Su Fengnian slowly closed his eyes and thought of something Su Xiao said. No one deserved to die from the beginning, and no one could not die. Su Fengnian's mind suddenly flashed with a picture of the spring god lake that he desperately wanted to remember but could not. Su Fengnian, whose consciousness was blurred, was instantly immersed in it as if he was in the picture. It was a boundless autumn with golden wheat as far as the eye could see, and a gentle breeze blew. On a small path, there was a woman walking in front. She stretched out her slender hand and gently brushed the wheat, leaving an unforgettable back view. Su Fengnian's body somehow had a lofty feeling that the great Qin kingdom was destined to last forever. Su Fengnian looked down and held a heavy wheat in his hand. He suddenly raised his head, and the woman happened to turn her head. Just as he was about to see her face, the picture suddenly shattered and everything disappeared with the wind. He reached out to grab her, but the harder he tried, the more he failed. He only heard 2 words with a strange accent and yet contradictory as if he had heard them thousands of times. Huang Longshi, who was clearly dead drunk, slowly opened his eyes. The candlelight burned and occasionally made a faint sound like soybeans cracking. His daughter had long disappeared. The old man sighed in his heart. After he was chased out of the Shangyin Academy, he had told the emperors and ministers of the Spring and Autumn Kingdom countless hateful things. Unfortunately, they all loved to listen to him and were intoxicated. However, he had finally found a daughter who was willing to listen to him speak the truth, but she did not like to listen to his nagging. Huang Longshi poured himself a bowl of wine and took a sip. He picked up a very tasty braised carp with his chopsticks. Of all the flavors, spicy was the most important. If it was not spicy, it would be tasteless. This time, he acted as a matchmaker for Zhulu Mountain and West Chu. He acted as the middleman. Chao Chongqing was the guest of Zhulu Mountain, while Zhulu Mountain provided money and manpower for the restoration of West Chu. He was busy, but it was only to delay the opportunity for the Zhao family to unify the world. Huang Longshi knew that everything he had done in this life was just to take advantage of the situation. Huang Zhentu, Wang Mingyin, Shenyuan Dandan, Li Chungang, Yang Taisui, Han Shengxian, Song Yanqing, including Lu Haoshi, Zhao Huangchao, Gu Zhentang, and so on, who most likely would not have a good ending. Counting with one's fingers, the older generation of Liang Jianghu seemed to have all died in one night. After the peace of the Central Plains, Huang Longshi transferred the fate of the world to Jianghu. The boiling water seemed lively, but it was nothing more than pulling up seedlings to help them grow and draining the pond to catch fish. The imperial examinations flourished. The imperial court, which revered only Confucianism, became more and more disciplined. The Jianghu, which was struggling at death's door, became more and more silent. The common people were at peace. Huang Longshi grabbed the mink hat from his head and glanced at the sunflower on the table. He smiled bitterly and said, "Daughter, why are you joining in the fun? I was still thinking that there was someone left who could clean my grave for me in the future." A young girl ran out of Shen Jiafeng. Her raven hair slanted. Outside the small city of Liang that was not even worth mentioning, Luo Yang got rid of Song Yanqing a little faster than Lu Haoshe expected. This was usually negligible, but here it was enough to turn the world upside down. In the history of the world, there were only a few sword immortals who had become land immortals. Many sword immortals only had one sword or one move that reached the land immortal realm. Wei Chao, the sword immortal of the previous dynasty, was like this. Song Yanqing's sword was unstoppable. In Lu Haoshe's view, even Wang Xianji and Tuoba would have a headache if they were to fight against it. Song Yanqing's sword was already at the peak of the way of the sword. Lu Haoshe had been influenced by Song Yanqing for a long time in the celestial realm. If he were to encounter it, he could only retreat. That year in Taiyan City, the woman who had reached the land immortal realm was able to escape unscathed with that sword. It was enough to show the supreme power of the land immortal realm. Song Yanqing's sword that broke through 2 realms without any warning was undoubtedly a great harvest for Lu Haoshe. It also made Su Fengnian and the woman in white suffer. In Lu Haoshe's original plan, since he had sensed the existence of Luo Yang, he could only take advantage of the situation. After entering the city, no matter if he killed or seriously injured Su Fengnian, he could only retreat after one attack. Lu Haoshe admitted that he had no chance of winning against Luo Yang, who could combine the heaven and earth into a single line of sword. It was the same when he met her before. However, after she took Song Yanqing's sword without hesitation, Lu Haoshe did not think that there was such a big disparity between victory and defeat. The woman in white gave up the power of the sword that combined the heaven and earth and rushed to Su Fengnian's side. Her eyes were unreadable. Lu Haoshe, who was secretly drawing with his fingers, sneered, "Demon Luo Yang, who ranked 4th in the world, is actually so reckless?" Luo Yang, who had her back to Lu Haoshe, did not say anything. On the wall, a bright vermilion robe finally appeared. The otherworldly item held its head with its 5 arms and grabbed both sides of its face. Its sharp nails drew blood, and it was in so much pain that it could not make a sound. In the city, Song Yanqing, whose body was badly mutilated, staggered and sat on the ground. He reached out his trembling hands and struggled to take off his severely damaged cloth shoes. He gently held them in his arms and died in Zhonghu. The black carp that Luo Yang relied on for survival had already dissipated in the sword energy in the city. Another red carp with long whiskers, which was also taken from Emperor Qin's mausoleum, appeared out of thin air. Luo Yang broke all of the dragon whiskers, and the dragon whiskers quickly merged into the blood vessels in her palm. Lu Haoshe suddenly shook his sleeves. Luo Yang in white seemed to be hit hard in the back. After shaking violently, she did not fall. She leisurely exhaled a mouthful of golden mist and said softly, "I won't wait any more. What you gave me 800 years ago, I will return it to you today. From now on, there will be no Qin empresses or Luo Yang in this world. What will happen to you and her in the future?" Luo Yang bit her thin lips and stopped talking. She let Lu Haoshe's qi hit her back again and again. She exhaled the rich cultivation that she had accumulated for hundreds of years, which turned into a cloud of golden mist and filled Su Fengnian's body. Lu Haoshe's face changed dramatically. Without hesitation, he began to retreat. Su Fengnian slowly stood up. His eyes were golden, and he stretched his body as if he was showing off to the world. Then, he quietly looked at the woman in white in front of him and said in a mellow voice, "Luo Yang." The woman's figure gradually swayed and began to dissipate in the wind. Tears streamed down her face, but she bent down with a smile and pulled back her sleeves. It was just like the first time they met 800 years ago, when he had yet to proclaim himself emperor, when she was in the fields and had yet to enter the palace. Using a delicate voice that the devil Luo Yang would never utter, she softly called out, "Your Majesty." Chapter 856. In Xianxia City, there was a graceful woman wrapped in silver like a fur coat. It was hard to imagine that 20 years ago it was a ghost city filled with a gloomy aura. She looked like a widow from a poor family who married into a rich family and suddenly changed her appearance. There was no trace of poverty, only the splendor of jewelry. A carriage slowly moved through a quiet and deep narrow alley. The horse's hooves clattered against the limestone floor, creating a series of crisp sounds. The coachman was a beautiful woman. She was called Apricot Flower in the Prince of Jing'an's estate. Everyone knew that she was young Master Lu's personal maidservant. As that blind young Master Lu's position in Xianxia became more and more stable, her status also rose along with it. Even the head steward of the Prince of Jing'an's estate had to squeeze out a smile when he saw her. He was afraid that she might blow a pillow wind at young Master Lu's side. As for whether she really had intimate relations with young Master Lu, only the heavens knew. Who in the Prince of Jing'an's estate didn't know that young Master Lu was the #1 favorite of the young vassal king? Xinghua, a man of sacrifice whose real name was Lu Lingbao, carefully pulled up the curtain. Lu Su walked out of the carriage and pushed the door to the private courtyard. Xinghua could only wait outside the courtyard and did not dare to look at the courtyard door. There were 2 small courtyards. Originally, there were 2 begonia plants in the courtyard. However, begonia plants could not withstand the sunlight. The courtyard was dark and did not absorb the sunlight. One of them had already died. Lu Su went straight to the main room. Before he went up the stairs, he stopped. A woman who was guarding the door was frowning. When she saw Lu Su, she was first surprised and then happy. She quickly walked down the stairs and kept a good distance from him. She said respectfully and softly, "Greetings, young Master Su." Lu Suan smiled lightly and bowed his head slightly. He did not lack etiquette. Although he disliked this woman of unknown origin and never hid it in front of the young lord, he would not make an enemy out of her if he had to deal with her. There was a sound of porcelain smashing on the ground. Lu Su looked up at the main room and frowned. Since Zhenwu the Great stepped on the boat at the Spring Lake, the king of Jing and returned to Xiangfan City in a daze. He had not shown up for many days. Many important political affairs that needed to be annotated by the lord were delayed. Although he was worthy of the title of the most intelligent person in the Jing'an Palace, it had always been taboo for counselors to overstep their boundaries. The woman sighed and said, "Young Master Lu, please come in and persuade him. His Highness has only been drinking ever since he came back. He has eaten nothing." Lu Suan nodded and walked up the stairs. The woman followed him closely. She was dignified but charming. She looked like the princess who died with the king of Jing'an. She gently pushed the door open for Lu Su. In the room, Zhao Sun's hair was disheveled. He was sitting in the corner with his back against the wall. Dozens of wine jugs were rolling around him. He smelled of wine and did not look like a lord at all. When he saw Lu Su, he felt guilty at first and then became angry. He picked up the wine jug with trembling fingers. The jug was empty. The young lord, who was almost as famous as his father in Xiangfan City, waited for a long time but did not get a drop of wine. He threw the wine jug and smashed the only remaining porcelain bottle on the shelf. Lu Suan was blind but not blind. He was not surprised by Zhao Sun's depression. His Royal Highness had not experienced many twists and turns in his life. After he became the new king of Jing'an, his life was smooth. However, when he was on his way to the top, his dignity was trampled on by the enemy he hated the most. Lu Su did not comfort him. Instead, he turned around and took a new wine jug from the woman. He sat opposite Zhao Sun and handed it to the young lord, who only dared to hide and drown his sorrows in wine. When he heard the woman's footsteps and the sound of the door closing, he said slowly, "Crown Prince Bailiang is really the reincarnation of Zhenwu Great Emperor. That is a good thing." Zhao Sun, whose eyes were cloudy, was stunned for a moment. Then he regained some clarity. He took the wine jug and stopped drinking. Instead, he stared at the true backbone of Xiangfan. Lu Su said calmly, "Back then, the theory of yin-yang and 5 elements was popular in the Shangyin Academy. Huang Sanjia claimed that Li Yang, who had the fire element, was going to unify the world. The nemesis of fire was water. Bailiang ruled the northwest and had the Wudong Mountain, which worshipped Zhenwu Great Emperor. It was said that 800 years ago, Zhenwu Great Emperor came to the world and became the emperor of the Qin dynasty. The Qin dynasty originated from the southern border of Bailiang. This was the reason why the imperial astronomer instigated the case of the white clothes in the capital. For the emperor, who did not care about the common people and ghosts, he would rather believe in the change of the dynasty and the change of the 5 elements than not. The old lord is the adopted son of Wang Xianxia of the Emperor of War City. There was also the disturbance of Zhenwu Great Emperor coming to the world at the Lake of Spring. I don't believe that the emperor can sit still. I believe that Wang Xianxia can ignore the imperial edict, but I don't believe that Wang Xianxia can resist the temptation of fighting with Zhenwu Great Emperor. What other competition in the world could be more suitable than the battle with God Yujing, who had walked down from the celestial heavens, as the finale? The imperial court can tolerate His Royal Highness, who has already gained power, but it will never accept a king of Bailiang who has ambition and fate. Why don't you make a bet with me on whether Wang Xianji will leave the city in the near future? Zhao Sun's eyes lit up. He did not care about the disrespect in Lu Su's words towards the royal family. He clapped his hands and laughed. That makes sense. I won't bet, I'll definitely lose. Chapter 857. Lu Xuan stood up and patted the dust off. He said to himself, a vassal king has been drinking for a few days. What a scandal. You are not afraid of being laughed at by Lu Su, but are you not afraid of being laughed at by women? I have only heard that men like to puff themselves up in front of the women they like, but I have never heard of a man pretending to be a coward in front of a woman. Zhao Sun smiled in relief, but he was still a bit embarrassed. Fortunately, the blind scholar could not see it. Zhao Sun put down the flagon and stood up abruptly. He straightened his messy clothes. Outside the house came a man's deep voice and suppressed coughing. Zhao Sun hurriedly opened the door. He did not even look at the face of the prince's mansion's men of sacrifice. He directly took a section of the secret letter that was secretly delivered to Jing and Palace by a carrier pigeon. After opening it, his face turned red and his handsome face was so excited that it was twisted. He read the few words of the secret letter several times before he clenched it tightly in his hand. He turned around and walked quickly to hug Lu Su. He laughed and said, Mr. Lu really can predict the future. He is not inferior to Huang Sonjia. He is out of the city. The woman standing far away in the courtyard secretly looked over, and happened to see the handsome face of the blind man who seemed to have everything under control. She did not know why, but her intuition told her that Mr. Lu, who was smiling peacefully, was not smiling. In the Shen family square, which stood aloof from worldly affairs, smoke rose in spirals from kitchen chimneys and the sound of chickens and dogs. A Confucian in a green robe with white hair on his temples walked in. He looked elegant and graceful. When he was young, he must have been a handsome man who could make many women fall in love at first sight. He stood quietly under a row of lush feng shui trees at the entrance of the village, as if he was looking for someone. Huang Longsher walked out of the house and looked at each other. Huang Longsher hesitated for a moment but still walked toward the old man in green robe. They stood together at the entrance of the village. The curved river gurgled. The scholar in green robe chuckled and said, A few years ago, I secretly looked through the Shen family's genealogy records. Your handwriting is still the same as when you were studying at the Shangyin Academy. This time, I guessed that you would most likely appear here, so I came to try my luck. The corners of Huang Longsher's mouth twitched. How could I have disturbed you? The West Chu Empire is on the verge of being reinstated. There are so many things that you, Chao Chongqing, have to personally attend to. Oh, I know. So it's old monster Wang who has left Martial Emperor City and returned to the Jianghu. But since it was this old monster who was going to deal with that pitiful worm, even if you, Chao Zhongqing, were a saint, you still wouldn't be able to stop him. Unless Deng Tea returns from the Eastern Sea, and if he is willing to join hands with you to resist the enemy. However, if you really anger Wang Xianji, no matter who he wants to kill, even the Heavenly King can't do anything about it. Even such a monster that appears only once every 500 years is qualified to fight with Ancestor Lu. Chao Chongqing smiled and asked, If I join Luo Yang, we can't protect Su Fengnian? Huang Longsher shook his head and said, Something happened over there. Song Yanqing used the Earth Fairy sword. I thought his last 14th sword was at most a celestial phenomenon. I didn't expect him to have cramps. Master Lu Hao seized the opportunity and was very clever. Luo Yang was careless this time. If you want that kid to be safe, you can only hope that he won't have cramps like Song Yanqing and invite the Zhenwu Great Emperor's Dharmakaya after the Spring God Lake. Otherwise, even if Wang Xianji's original intention was to give face to the Zhao family's son and go out of the city to put on a show, he might be itching for a good fight. But it's easy to invite a god but hard to send one away. Not to mention that this kind of fake immortal can't withstand Wang Xianji's full attack. Even if Wang Xianji let him go, he would still make that kid lose a layer of skin. From my point of view, it's possible that someone around him will die. Luo Yang? Su Longxiang? Or Su Shao? Chao Chongqing sighed and said, Why does it sound like Zhenwu's reincarnation doesn't have any benefits? Huang Longsher sneered and said, It's a broken business that's destined to lose money. Look at that kid in the past 20 years. Who around him has it easy? If there's really such a thing as the reincarnation of a celestial being, then Zhenwu's incarnation of the Great Qin dynasty 800 years ago was born. Now, not to mention Zhenwu Great Emperor, Even if the three old masters sitting in the three pristines hall came down to the mortal world, they wouldn't be of any use. Because it's against the law of heaven, they would still be suppressed by the Zhao family. Only after 300 years and 14 years later, will. Chao Chongqing smiled and asked, will what? Huang Longshe sneered and said, you'll know when you live for another 300 or 400 years. Chao Chongqing smiled and said, no matter what happens in the next few hundred years, living in the world, there are many things in the present that we should do our best without going into a dead end. Then, in the end, we'll still have a clear conscience. For the first time, Huang Longshe asked someone else a question. What about the girl that Li Chungang likes? Chao Chongqing joked. Even you can't predict? Huang Longshe said indifferently. There are many people that I can't predict. Chao Chongqing sighed and said, the Xinwu city's killer cat, the princess and I were watching the battle. If it wasn't for the sword that went to the Xinwu city, there would be another sword that fell from the sky. Huang Longshe said, we're just a wild old man's words. As for the Jianghu, it's just a dying flash. Chao Chongqing laughed it off. A tall and sturdy old man with a head full of white hair did not take the flat road. Instead, he chose to go deep into the mountains and forests where there were few people. He only slowed down slightly when he was near the city, but he was still far faster than a horse. The old man in hemp shoes and hemp clothes stopped for the first time since he left the city in the Eastern Sea. A beautiful young woman pressed her hands on the hilt of an ancient sword that was inserted into the ground. She blocked the path of Wang Xianji from the Xinwu city. She only had the great Liang dragon sparrow. But she was facing the most powerful person in the world who had dominated the Jianghu for 60 years. Chapter 858. This chapter is a little late. The second chapter is before 12 o'clock. The third chapter is before dawn. The old man who had been in charge of the martial emperor city for 80 years looked at the great Liang dragon sparrow from the sword tomb of the Wu family and nodded. Needless to say, with just this sword, he was qualified to challenge Wang Xianji's sword. Jiang and I bit her lips. She would be lying to herself if she said that she was not nervous at all. She could not be nice to old man Li, who was wearing a sheepskin coat, because the senior who taught her calligraphy but did not practice swordsmanship did not have the slightest arrogance. Instead, he looked like an old man who liked to boast. She was not afraid of Chao Zhongqing, because in her heart, Chao Guanzi had always been that uncle she had seen in the West Chu Imperial Palace waiting for the imperial order when she was young. He was kind and amiable. She did not think much of Chao Guanzi's so-called outstanding martial cultivation of the eight-dipper celestial phenomenon. But Wang Xianji was different. Even in the beautiful cage in the bitter cold Bailiang, she had heard of how the old man with the surname Wang suppressed all the heroes in the world. He claimed to be the second in the world and no one dared to claim to be the first in the world to mock the whole Jianghu. He broke the wooden horse and ox, defeated Dong Tai, defeated Chao Chongqing, defeated Gu Zhentang. All the masters of Liang who were on the wushu list had lost to this old man who never left the city. Old man Wang became a whetstone for the whole martial arts. How sharp the others were! They had to go to East Sea and Martial Emperor City to be sharpened to convince the masses. Countless Jianghu talents dreamed of fighting with old man Wang. Even if they lost in one move, they would be proud of it. The scariest part was that in the 100 years that Wang Xianji was in, the pugilistic world was filled with layers upon layers of mountains and giant peaks confronting each other. Various pugilistic world geniuses were born in large numbers and could be said to be endless. It was far from what the previous 100 years of pugilistic world could compare to. However, Wang Xianji was still unshakable and left the world behind. It was widely acknowledged that only the demon-slaying platform from 60 years ago, Qi Xuanzhen, could be compared to him. Unfortunately, after Qi Xuanzhen, another immortal from Taoism, Hong Shixiang, had just entered the pugilistic world and left. Therefore, Wang Xianji was still worthy of being called invincible in the world. Even Li Chungang, who had extremely high standards, admitted that even if he re-entered the realm of Sword Immortal, he would still be no match for the old monster Wang. Jiang and I hesitated and said, Castellan Wang, Uncle Chao said that you are going to kill Su Fengnian. Wang Xianji's voice was loud and clear. He said calmly, this old man had an oath with the late emperor of Liang. In this old man's lifetime, no matter if the king of Jing and Zhao Hang succeeded in seizing the throne or not, I have to ensure that this adopted son and his lineage will be rich and prosperous. Zhao Heng's death has a lot to do with Bailiang. However, this old man is not so despicable to get entangled with a junior. Otherwise, when the crown prince of Bailiang, Su Fengnian, carried a bowl and ascended the building, even if Dong Tai personally escorted him, it would not be so easy. This time, this old man left the city because he heard that Su Fengnian invited the Dharma image of the great emperor of Zhanwu at the Spring God Lake. Furthermore, a reclusive old celestial being from the Taoist sect came out of his body and brought a secret decree to marshal Emperor City. This old man has never had the chance to fight with Qi Xianzhu in his entire life. Coincidentally, he wanted to take this opportunity to witness the magnificence of a celestial being. Zhang and I wanted to say something but stopped. Wang Xianji smiled faintly and said with a pleasant expression, "This old man knows that your real name is Zhang Si. You are the princess of the fallen West Chu. You carry the great fortune from the great Qin dynasty to the West Chu. Your body's foundation is also excellent. Li Chungang is guiding you in the way of the sword, and Chao Chongqing is sparing no effort to help you maintain your realm. That is why there is such a magnificent scene of a woman riding a flying sword today. To the Jianghu, it is not easy. This old man has been overseeing the martial emperor city for many years. Other than those who have no attachments and want to die, he has never destroyed a good talent in the Jianghu. The reason why Chao Chongqing dared to let you block the way alone is presumably because he is sure that this old man will not make things difficult for you. This old man might as well be frank. The reason why I, Wang Xianji, am able to achieve what I have today is largely because Li Chungang did not hesitate to ruin his reputation and allowed me to break his sword, the wooden horse, and the ox. Furthermore, this old man entered the Jianghu because he was envious of Li Chuangong's famous sword. Zhang Si, since you are his disciple, this old man will not take the initiative to harm your life and destroy your realm. You can rest assured about this. However, how can this old man not see that your realm is unstable? Before you truly enter the land Immortal realm, every time you use the Earth Immortal sword, it is a desperate move that will reduce your lifespan. Therefore, this old man would like to advise you. Since you know that you can't stop me, don't easily fight because of your personal feelings. This old man has watched the Jianghu in the Eastern Sea for more than 80 years, but only one female sword immortal, Wu Su, appeared. I really don't want you to die halfway. Zhang Si shook his head. Wang Xianji smiled. This old man has never forced people to do things against their will. The reason why he said so much is mostly because of your relationship with Li Chungang. If you retreat without using a sword, you will definitely not be satisfied. It will also be detrimental to your sword heart. Zhang Si said seriously, I have 2 swords. Wang Xianji laughed heartily. There was actually someone in this world who dared to bargain with him. He said in a clear voice, 2 swords is fine. Let this old man see if the disciple of Li Chungang and Chao Zhongqing will disappoint with the addition of the great Liang dragon sparrow. Zhang Si said methodically, this year, Uncle Chao secretly took me to the Wu family's sword tomb and Dongyue sword pool. I climbed up the Wu family's sword mountain filled with famous swords and also saw the deep pool with hundreds of thousands of ancient swords. Wang Xianji was very experienced. After thinking for a while, he said, it is the superior sword way of seeing thousands of swords and then recognizing them. Chao Guanzi's spirit has always been rare. The sword way he taught you is naturally not ordinary. Zhang Si shook his head and said, at first, Uncle Chao had this intention. But I accidentally affected the qi in 2 places. Then, I accidentally changed to a different sword way. But it is only a prototype now. Uncle Chao said that this move will become stronger when facing a strong opponent. If the opponent is not City Lord Wang, but an ordinary person, it will not be so powerful. Chapter 859. Wang Xianji smiled and said, little girl, you don't have to explain to this old man so clearly. This old man can't wait for someone to seriously injure this old man. When Wang Xianji said this, there wasn't the slightest bit of pretentious arrogance, because this was the principle of heaven and earth. Zhang and I blushed slightly and nodded. Zhang and I slowly closed her eyes. Her hands that were pressing on the hilt of the great Liang dragon sparrow sword floated up a few inches, and the famous sword was unsheathed. Wang Xianji looked up at the sky, nodded and praised, interesting. Zhang and I, who had just raised her hands, suddenly pressed down, and the great Liang dragon sparrow returned to the scabbard. She lightly shouted, place your piece. Place a piece on the chessboard? Where was the chessboard? What was the piece that was going to be placed on the chessboard? The majestic old man's expression remained calm, but a strange light flashed in his eyes. He had actually underestimated this girl. In his eyes, The first move of unsheathing the sword and returning it to the scabbard could be considered a small matter, but what happened next had some great significance. The clear sky was instantly cut into countless crisscrossing ravines. Sword chi. Thousands of sharp sword chi raged in the sky. Two mighty waves of sword chi, one from the Wu family sword tomb, the other from the Dongyue sword pool, like a black and white double line drawing a chessboard. With the sword chi as the line, with the sky as the chessboard, what a big move! Wang Xianji instantly understood the subtlety of it. The little girl was right when she said that one would become stronger when facing a strong opponent. It was because the opponent was Wang Xianji that the waves of sword chi from the sword tomb and sword pool came so quickly and densely. Wang Xianji's smile deepened. She was really an honest and adorable girl. No wonder Li Chungang valued her so much. When Jiang and I uttered the two words, the sword chi in the sky was like a torrential downpour, falling down in unison. Furthermore, the falling was not without order, but all the sword chi was pointed at Wang Xianji, so much so that it seemed like a majestic tornado on land. Wang Xianji did not move, allowing the sword chi to pour down from above his head. However, the sword chi, without exception, was stirred up dozens of feet above his head. When the last sword chi dissipated, it was only 3 feet away from Wang Xianji's head. The old man in hemp shoes and hemp clothes did not move at all. Just like that, he withstood all the ancient sword chis that came from thousands of miles away with only the vigorous gang chi that flowed out of his body. Wang Xianji looked at the pale-faced young woman and said calmly, "Indeed, it is still in its infancy. This old man is looking forward to the scene of you attracting 2 real sword mountains like a swarm of locusts." Wang Xianji sighed in her heart. This woman actually had the aura of becoming the master of all the famous swords in the world. How many years had it been since he felt that the younger generation would surpass him? Wang Xianji said solemnly, "Jiangxi, this old man is very curious about your second sword." Su Fengnian's phoenix eyes, which were originally slightly feminine, turned into a strange golden color. His entire person seemed to have the aura of a monarch. He reached out his hand and grabbed Luo Yang, whose body and soul were unstable. He chuckled and said, "As long as I don't die and I don't let you go, where can you go?" 800 years ago, the necromancer who went to the sea to visit the immortals had already asked for an elixir of immortality. However, you secretly destroyed it. Do you think I don't know? I just don't want to argue with you. After saying that, Su Fengnian ignored the astonished Luo Yang. He turned his head and shook his head at the otherworldly item in the red robe on the wall. The otherworldly item instantly quieted down. Su Fengnian pressed his forehead with one hand and closed his eyes. Then, he opened them again and cleared his mind. He smiled and said something contradictory. "I'm really me. Everything comes from the same origin. I can't escape from the fate of being alone. After the time it takes to burn an incense stick, will I still be me? Will you still be you?" He pulled Luo Yang, who was crying and laughing unknowingly, and carried her on his back. Then, he strode forward and chased after Lu Hao, who had fled when he saw that the situation was not good. After a few blinks of an eye, he caught up with the guard dog of the Zhao family, who was said to have been at Celestial Phenomenon for 50 years. Su Fengnian almost ran side by side with him. He smiled and said, "Lu Hao, you were very impressive when you asked 3 questions just now." Lu Hao instantly drifted more than 30 meters away. He shouted in horror and anger, "Who are you?" The golden eyes of Su Fengnian slightly narrowed his eyes and smiled. "The capital of the small country where ancestor Lu lives has been shot into a hedgehog by Great Qin's crossbows. If Great Qin's elite soldiers don't die, they will destroy you all." Lu Hao was so angry that he laughed. "Su Fengnian, are you crazy?" The reason why people in Jianghu were polite to those monks and nuns was because they were afraid of their strange hands. It was the same reason why swordsmen were afraid of encountering a new sword. Unless one was an expert in martial arts, no one dared to say that they would not fail miserably at such an easy task. Lu Hao had guarded the imperial palace for 60 years and read all the martial arts manuals. It was not wrong to say that he was a frog in a well, but the well itself was almost as wide as heaven and earth. Lu Hao had seen too many amazing moves. He did not dare to be arrogant just because he had stayed at Celestial Phenomenon for a few decades. That year, when the young leader of Wudong entered and left Great Peace City as if there was no one there, he and Han Diaoxi quietly watched from afar. After weighing the pros and cons, they did not even have the desire to make a move. This year, Mount Longhu had another Zhao Ningxian, who was said to be the reincarnation of the first ancestor. However, Lu Hao's cautious nature did not mean that this old celestial phenomenon expert was a pushover. Killing a first-rank expert who was unwilling to fight to the death had always been as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Lu Hao returned empty-handed because he felt embarrassed. He felt that Su Fengnian was very familiar with unorthodox methods and was not easy to deal with. Su Fengnian was like a maggot in a corpse. He did not let Lu Hao pull away and asked with a smile, "It is said that the strong are bold. Why are you, a celestial phenomenon expert, so cowardly?" The sky above them was originally blue and cloudless. First there were clouds, then dark clouds. Lu Hao did not say anything as he flew. Su Fengnian glanced at the sky and stopped. Lu Hao, who was like a stray dog, also stopped. His face was gloomy. "I heard that there is a sword formation called the Thunder Pool, but how can it compare to a real thunder pool? To deal with an otherworldly item like you, it is very effective." Chapter 860. There is one more chapter before dawn. There is no need to wait for more. I have a pot of wine made in Jianghu. I have a palm that can support the 5 mountains. I have a mouthful that can eat the spring and autumn. Hundreds of years ago, a Jianghu elder set the rule of the first-rank 4 realms. He used these 3 sentences to praise the celestial phenomenon realm. He said that once a celestial phenomenon realm expert could resonate with the heavens and earth, they would be able to look down on the world with disdain. Lu Hao sure looked at the sky and his smile deepened. In order to become famous in Jianghu, as long as one was a Jianghu disciple, they would have a few hidden skills. For example, Song Yanqing had brought 14 swords and 14 moves on this trip. Lu Hao sure was no exception. This lightning pool was originally intended to be a big gift, waiting for the next time Chao Zhongqing, who had transcended mortality and entered holiness, came to the capital. Chao Guanzi's 3 visits to the imperial palace were like passing through corridors, slapping him in the face each time. How could Lu Hao swallow this resentment? He never thought that he would use it on that kid first. The black clouds were like ink. Lu Hao sure quietly waited for the thunder to roll. Lu Hao sure had seen many smart people who relied on shortcuts to the south to win the favor of the emperor. They were very skilled at fishing for fame. Prime Minister Zhao Danping of Xianxia was one of them. But in Great Peace City, Lu Hao sure had served 3 generations of emperors of Liang. He had always been the mainstay of that capital. Even Zhao Danping could not share the incense and friendship that Lu Hao sure had accumulated for the Zhao family. Lu Hao sure was used to using his cultivation to crush his opponents. This time, he carried the imperial order to kill Su Fengnian. He and Song Yanqing only had the first move. If they did not succeed and Su Fengnian escaped, they still had a backup plan. Therefore, Lu Hao sure had no interest in fighting for his life. But even a clay Buddha had anger. Moreover, Lu Hao sure and Bailiang were in a situation where they would not rest until one of them was dead. This Su Fengnian exuded an evil aura from head to toe. Lu Hao sure had the idea of finding out what was going on. Su Fengnian, who is still carrying Luo Yang on his back, is calm and unruffled, waiting for the heavenly tribulation to land. He only had 30 minutes. If Lu Hao sure insisted on avoiding the battle, Meng Qi did not have much confidence in capturing the old fox's Achilles heel. Celestial phenomenon experts were favored by the heavens and earth, and it was extremely difficult to capture their flow of qi. If Lu Hao sure wanted to escape, he would not be able to escape the heavenly net because he was not an earth immortal who could attract the divine tribulation. He was like the fish that escaped the net. Even if Su Fengnian could catch up with Lu Hao sure, he could not afford to waste time. However, there is no such thing as an invulnerable move in the world. As long as Lu Hao sure is arrogant and has the courage to take root, Su Fengnian does not mind enduring the so-called rolling thunder in the pond, and then wait for an opportunity to make his move. The black clouds in the sky suddenly fell and floated on the ground. It was like a mysterious painting of the world changing, giving people a feeling of the vicissitudes of life. Su Fengnian's upper body is exposed from the clouds. The waist-high black clouds are rolling and turbulent. Lightning flashes and thunder rumbles in the surrounding clouds, and the lightning gradually intertwines into a net. Su Fengnian walks slowly, and immediately becomes the fish that is targeted by the fisherman casting the net. In the blink of an eye, purple thunder floats in the sea of clouds. At a glance, there are no less than 50 of them. They are of different sizes, as big as the mouth of a well, and as small as a fist. Between the purple thunder, there is a constantly jumping snow-white lightning connecting them. It really is a lightning pool not only in name but also in reality. Su Fengnian, who did not stop walking, is extremely daring. He reaches out and grabs a purple thunder, and the entire lightning pool flips over. More than 50 purple thunder suddenly fly over. Su Fengnian's right hand hooks into the purple thunder, and purple gas lingers around his arm. His left hand is not idle either, lightly waving it, and every time, it will hit a purple thunder that smashes towards him. However, this lightning pool is very domineering, and with Su Fengnian holding the purple thunder tightly, it does not weaken at all. This shocking and magnificent scene is not damaged at all. More than 50 purple thunder flew back, and after being hit, it bounces back about 20 zhong before rapidly spinning back. Their momentum is fierce, and their speed did not decrease, instead increasing. Su Fengnian, who is walking slowly, seems to be trapped in a moving lightning pool. The woman behind him uses her chin to touch his shoulder. Su Fengnian said softly, "I remember that I promised to accompany you to the peak of Mount Kunlun to see the Sea of Clouds, but after a few rounds of hunting, I either forgot or missed it. Later on, when I made up my mind, you were already unwilling. Today, just treat it as making up for it," she said softly. "Compared to the smoke of the whole country that you gave to that vixen, the Sea of Clouds is nothing." Su Fengnian tilted his head and gently stroked her cheek. Taking a deep breath, he placed the purple thunder in his hand that has not been released into his mouth, and swallowed it into his stomach. He laughed and said, "Back then the whole world was eaten by me, a few small sky thunders are nothing." Su Fengnian held a purple thunder in each hand and placed them into his mouth. When he had swallowed half of the purple thunder, the Sea of Clouds dissipated, and the thunder pool also disappeared. Lu Haosher, who was standing 300 feet away, was dumbfounded. He did not expect that this guy would use such a barbaric method to break the secret art of astronomical phenomena that he painstakingly created. 50 sky thunders that were painstakingly formed with the help of the heavens and earth. The Qi cultivators of Fulong of the North sect had poured in a lot of effort to create them, and the cultivation base of a few great grandmasters had been directly squeezed dry. How could Lu Haosher not feel distressed when he lost half of his originally strong foundation? What was even more hateful was that evil horned centipede, whose cultivation base had inexplicably skyrocketed, even let out a comfortable burp. He gave Lu Haosher a sarcastic smile and asked lazily, "Why aren't you running?" Lu Haosher quickly and neatly began to retreat. "No wonder you haven't become an Earth Immortal after 50 years. Su Fengnian narrowed his eyes and sneered, "If you didn't stop just now, I might not be able to do anything to you. But now it's too late." Su Fengnian stretched out a finger and cut a thin blood groove between his eyebrows. Lu Haosher, who was fleeing in a hurry, suddenly felt as if his head had been split open. A shocking crack appeared from his forehead from top to bottom. His face was covered in blood and he looked battered and exhausted. But this was not the most terrifying thing that made Lu Haosher tremble with fear. As the blood continued to flow from his face, his celestial cultivation base was like a flood that broke through a dam. Lu Haosher could clearly feel the depth of his cultivation base. It was originally like a lake that could only watch helplessly as the lake water dried up, completely unable to stop the lake's level from dropping. While Lu Haosher was feeling bitter and hateful, he also found it inconceivable. The essence of the celestial cultivation base was to live freely with the heavens and earth. It was the precursor to becoming an Earth Immortal and transcending the mortal world. How could one be trapped by one's own cocoon? Could it be that this guy had achieved the same level as the heavens and earth? Could it be that he could forcibly absorb the fate of others and create his own world? If it was Hong Shixiang who had cut down the fate of the 6 nations, Lu Haosher would still be somewhat skeptical. But even if the kid behind him had inherited Luo Yang's cultivation base, it was absolutely impossible for him to be so terrifying. Lu Haosher was almost possessed by the devil. He gritted his teeth and took advantage of the situation to shatter his celestial cultivation base that was already on the verge of collapse. The moment before he fell into the Shen Finger realm, he cut off his tail like a gecko and allowed the remaining half of the purple lightning to roll down. Like an Earth Immortal, he flew hundreds of feet away from the lunatic who had defeated him. Su Fengnian stopped and sighed in his heart. If only Lu Haosher had hesitated a little, and a little bit later, he was confident that he could have killed this old dog. He looked up at the sky and sneered. Li Yang's Zhao Shi was indeed the current orthodox ruler. Even a lackey who guarded the Zhao Shi's courtyard had a considerable amount of fate. Su Fengnian turned around and looked at the dense sword energy 10 miles away. It was a grand formation. Su Fengnian silently put the purple lightning into his sleeve and melted it into his qi. Luo Yang struggled to land on the ground and said calmly, "You go." Su Fengnian held her hand and turned to look at her. She said sadly and resolutely, "You want the world, I only want you. I can't monopolize it. I'd rather not. It's been like this for 800 years, and it's still the same after 800 years. Su Fengnian suddenly laughed. Is Qin Empresses that great? Luo Yang looked shocked and took a step back. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "I'm him, he's not me." Luo Yang's expression was complicated. Su Fengnian squatted down and gestured for her to get on his back. He said softly, "Luo Yang, before returning to Bailiang, let's go to Luo Yang's city and have a look." Luo Yang kicked his butt hard. Su Fengnian, who fell flat on his face, continued squatting and said softly, "Back then, the great Qin iron cavalry couldn't flatten the desert called Beimang. In this life, we'll make up for it. Tuoba dared to bully my woman, I." Without waiting for Su Fengnian to finish, Luo Yang gently lay on his back. Su Fengnian stood up. "I'll deal with you later." Luo Yang said, "Beat Wang Xianji first." Chapter 861. It was a little late, but he didn't owe her anything. East Sea Martial Emperor City. There was a sword hovering outside the city. It had been there for a long time, so much so that the Jianghu people who were initially shocked by the sight of the 1,000 miles flying sword gradually lost their patience and interest. Some of the bored Jianghu people decided to find some entertainment by gambling on how long the sword would stay there. Those who bet early lost a lot of money. Some people in the city said that the flying sword was a challenge from the peach blossom sword god Dong Tai, and that he would soon ride a donkey into the city. Some people said that it was a sword newly comprehended by Dongyue sword pool's Song Nianqing. Some people swore that the old ancestor of the Wu clan's sword tomb was coming out of seclusion and was going to clear the name of the Wu clan's withered sword. Those who came to watch the show were waiting for the word, trouble. But since the sword didn't cause any trouble, they were used to the sword stopping outside the city. Only some naughty children born and raised in the martial emperor city would climb up the outer city wall from time to time and shoot the sword with their slingshots. During this period, there was a sword-wielding wanderer who wanted to amaze the world with a single brilliant feat. He stood on the sword and performed many lame sword moves. In the end, he was met with countless disdainful looks. He also felt embarrassed and resentfully jumped down and left the city. Almost no one noticed that an old man with snow-white eyebrows had arrived in the city. After he entered the city, he lived in seclusion and only occasionally went to the wall filled with the world's weapons. After looking at them for a while, he quietly returned. Every day, a famous sword would disappear without a trace. It was just that there were too many famous swords and sharp weapons on the wall. For example, Song Nianqing had brought 12 swords to challenge Wang Xianji. Except for the 6 swords that were shattered, the other 6 swords were stuck on the wall according to the old rules of the martial emperor city. They had been there for many years, and one of them had quietly disappeared yesterday. The one-armed old man with eyebrows that reached his knees came to the wall alone again. He looked at an ownerless sword that was higher up on the wall and smacked his lips. He seemed to be greedy. Others were greedy for beauty, food, and wine, but he seemed to be exceptionally unique. Most of the weapons on the wall were famed swords, and they took up almost half of the wall. This was not strange, as the sword forest had always been flourishing in the martial arts world. The old man stretched out 2 fingers and pinched a strand of his snow-white long eyebrows. Just as he was making up his mind to eat the new sword that he had taken a fancy to tonight, he exclaimed in surprise and turned his head to look. A Taoist priest with a sword on his back happened to be looking at him. The long-browed old man asked, "Little Taoist of Mount Longhu, why is the relic of ancestor Lu, which should be hanging on Wudong's big gung horn, with you?" The young Taoist in a plain and ordinary Taoist robe asked, "Senior, why did you enter the city and stop your sword outside?" The old man smiled and said, "This old man's last sword strike in this life is to strive for perfection, so that I can ask the strongest martial artist in the past 100 years. Originally, it was almost time to enter the city, but the one surnamed Wang unexpectedly left the city for the first time, leaving this old man hanging on the side. No matter, we can just wait for him to return to the city." "You are?" The Taoist priest replied calmly, "I am Xianxia of Mount Longhu." The old man made an "oh" sound. "I've heard of it. There is a saying in Jianghu about little ancestor Lu." Xianxia, who had been traveling Jianghu since leaving Wudong, asked, "Is Lord Wang going to stop a useless monk from the western regions?" May I ask who senior is? The old man smiled and said, What useless monk, it's Lu Songtao of Mount Zhulu. As for this old man's name, it doesn't matter. You only need to know that there is still a sword in this world that can make Wang Xianji the real second in the world. Xianxia smiled gently. The old man's fingers loosened his long eyebrows and said, Although you are a Taoist, you are also a swordsman. If this old man loses in the future, you will follow his next sword strike. It doesn't matter 10 or 20 years later, as long as it is not too long, until Wang Xianji ascends. Xianxia bowed slightly and then turned to leave. Lu Hao had never been so flustered before, like a drowning dog. 50 years of celestial phenomenon knowledge, in less than half an incense's time, disappeared like smoke. After confirming that the fellow wasn't chasing him, he still ran a dozen miles before stopping. He had never thought that there would be a day where he would be frightened by the mere twang of a bow. Advancing in the martial path was harder the further one went. Rank 3 to rank 2 was a huge threshold. Most of the disciples of rich families who had secret manuals and pills were stopped at this threshold. Cultivating martial arts was an extremely tough profession. It required talent as a foundation and also perseverance. After reaching rank 2 and becoming a master, one would immediately meet an even higher threshold. It was so high that many geniuses who didn't have enough perseverance would back off. Lu Hao had seen too many young people with natural advantages who couldn't enter the door and wasted their lives. Not to mention rank 1 to rank 4. It was because he knew that the road was difficult that Lu Hao, who was about to reach the peak, was heartbroken over his drop in rank. Lu Hao, who was filled with hatred, sat down on the ground. His hands stabbed into the ground and his fingers formed a hook, drawing a mud ditch. Lu Hao's emotions slowly calmed down. He took out a small sandalwood box from his sleeve and carefully opened it. After opening the box, a small pill was revealed. It didn't have any fragrance. Instead, it smelled bad. However, Lu Hao solemnly stretched out 2 fingers and tried to pinch the pill. This inconspicuous bait was rumored to be half a celestial medicine recipe obtained by the Qin dynasty's emperor when he went out to sea to visit immortals. There was a secret saying in the Taoist scriptures, if you don't accept the bait, stay in the human world and become an immortal. It meant that if one could obtain this pill, they would be able to ascend. Of course, Lu Hao knew that the pill in the box didn't have such effects. However, it could help him stabilize his current rank and fight for a chance to return to celestial phenomenon. Lu Hao suddenly retracted his fingers and closed the box. He stood up and looked around. He was still worried, so he circled around and made sure that there was no one within 2 miles. Then he sat down cross-legged and swallowed the bait. He closed his eyes and focused. Gradually, he entered the state of a dragon in the abyss. Ha ha! The 2 soft words suddenly rang in Lu Hao Shi's ears like a real clap of thunder. Wang Xianji didn't do anything in a hurry and was very slow. However, there were too many smart people in Jianghu and there were too many shortcuts. In the end, Wang Xianji, who was down to earth, became an anomaly. After he entered the martial emperor city, his cultivation had been steadily rising. He was not the youngest second-level master at that time, nor was he like Li Chungang, who broke through the next level a few years after reaching the first level. Wang Xianji had never had a stunning breakthrough. Compared to the martial arts geniuses who were chasing after the 4 grandmasters, Wang Xianji could only be regarded as a late bloomer. However, after he achieved the diamond body, Wang Xianji gradually became invincible among those in the same realm. Moreover, no one had thought that this tall young man who was only fit to watch the battle at that time would become a late bloomer. Especially when he broke the wooden horse ox with his bare hands, it made Wang Xianji truly reach the top of Jianghu. Since then, Wang Xianji had never tasted defeat until he was habitually called Old Monster Wang. This taciturn old man stood alone on the top of the martial emperor city tower, coldly overlooking Jianghu. Dong Tai, who rode a donkey and carried a peach branch, proudly climbed up the tower and went down after losing. Chao Chongqing, who made the son of the Zhao family restless, also went down after losing. In the end, very few people wanted to defeat this old monster. They just wanted to climb up the tower quickly and be content. If they were lucky enough to meet this old man and ask for some martial arts experience, it would undoubtedly be a pleasant surprise. Wang Xianji didn't like this kind of Jianghu. The martial emperor city lord, who was waiting for the little girl's second sword, raised his eyebrows, not knowing whether he was surprised or angry. Her sword strike caused a ripple to appear in Wang Xianji's tranquil state of mind. The sword opened the gate of heaven. The scene of the gate of heaven opening was splendid. A pillar of the gate of heaven fell to the ground. When the other pillar was erected, the gate of heaven was opened. Xianxia, who was holding the sword with her hands folded, was pale. She pushed the great Liang dragon sparrow into the ground inch by inch. In order to stop Wang Xianji from moving forward, this woman actually opened the gate of heaven by force. Obviously, the gate of heaven was opened for Wang Xianji. It was obvious that she wanted to take the initiative to send this invincible martial emperor city lord on his way. Blood seeped out of the corner of Jiang Ni's mouth. She continued to push the long sword into the ground, desperately trying to pull the other gate of heaven down. Only a few people in the world knew the truth. She was just a woman who was in so much pain when she moved books up the mountain that she thought she would die. She was just a timid woman who was afraid of hardship and did not dare to practice her sword. She was just a woman who was satisfied with earning some copper coins from reading books. She had never thought about riding a sword, reviving her country, or opening the gate of heaven with a sword. Such an unattainable thing. She never thought that she could do it. She just wanted to secretly stab him to death one day when he was not paying attention. Then, her life would be over. Wang Xianji still did not stop her sword from opening the gate of heaven. I, Wang Xianji, don't want to go through the gate of heaven. So what if the gate of heaven is opened? At this moment, Wang Xianji suddenly slid back and made a defensive posture. A figure broke through the gate of heaven and punched towards Wang Xianji. Wang Xianji slid back a full 300 feet. The second gate of heaven was about to support the gate of heaven and earth when it disappeared. Xianxia did not even have time to spit out a mouthful of blood. She looked at the figure in a daze. The figure flashed and pounced towards Wang Xianji. It was another simple punch. Although Wang Xianji did not fall, she was fiercely pushed back 700 feet. No one in the world could make Wang Xianji, who could kill immortals, retreat 10,000 feet. Chapter 862. A gentle breeze blew past. Dust drifted in the straight line where Wang Xianji had retreated. Some of the slightly taller mounds of earth were directly smashed apart by the old man's back. Fortunately, the two parties were fighting in the wilderness, so no outsider saw this shocking scene. Wang Xianji shook his ankles and simply kicked off the pair of tattered hemp shoes. His sleeves were also torn apart by him, revealing his thick bronze arms. His muscles were as hard as boulders and contained the power to split mountains and split cities. Martial Emperor City was built near the water and looked at the sea. Every year during the summer and autumn, there would be surging white waves. The waves would drag across 1,000 miles and hit the eastern city wall. 30 years ago, Wang Xianji would stand proudly on the eastern city wall every time there was a tornado on the sea. He would use his arms to hit the waves. In the past 30 years, two people had replaced him to hit the waves, but their momentum was not as great as Wang Xianji's. Martial arts had always been despised by the people of the three sects as they viewed it as an inferior technique that did not conform to the way of heaven. It was Wang Xianji who turned the tide with his own strength and changed the views of the people. Especially when Tuoba Bodhisattva and Shenyuan Pan achieved success and fame one after another, it made Wang Xianji, the pioneer of martial arts, like the sun in the sky, never to fall behind. Wang Xianji's expression was calm. He looked at the distance under his feet. His chi flowed and surged. His body was like the sea. In terms of internal energy, among the top 10 in the Wushu ranking, Chao Chongqing was even more outstanding than Deng Tai A, who was ranked third in the world. He was right behind Tuoba Bodhisattva, but he claimed that he could not compare to Wang Xianji. In terms of combat power, the green shirt sword god 60 years ago and the old man in the sheepskin fur coat were on par. However, Wang Xianji was much stronger than him 60 years ago. This was also why in the Battle of the Eastern Sea, even when facing Li Chungang who had returned to the peak of swordsmanship, Wang Xianji only used 90% of his strength. In the 500 years of Zhonghu, there were only 6 or 7 people who were recognized as the world's number one. In the recent 100 years, Wang Xianji was finally the one who took the throne. This old man who claimed to be the world's number 2 was undoubtedly more ferocious and invincible than the demon of Zhulu Mountain, Lu Songtao 100 years ago. Back then, Qi Xuanzhen, who was 60 years old but had a youthful face, stood on the evil-slaying platform and looked down at the world. He guarded the door for the heavenly Tao, so no demons and monsters could cause trouble in the world. With the old and strong Wang Xianji as the stabilizing force in Zhonghu, there was no martial artist who could stand out. Therefore, how could a new tree stand out in the Wulin world? 80 years had passed, and the 4 great grandmasters had become the top 10 martial arts appraisers that were held once every 10 years. The experts had changed again and again. No one knew what this old monster was thinking. Wang Xianji's lips curled into a hearty smile. It was finally here. The old man, who was more than 100 years old, bent his knees slightly, spread out his left hand and slowly stretched it forward. His right shoulder was tilted low, and his right hand was clenched into a fist. That uninvited guest had given Wang Xianji a gift with 2 punches, and he had sent Wang Xianji a full 1,000 feet away. There was absolutely no reason for Wang Xianji not to return the favor. The old man in coarse hemp clothes made this simple and unremarkable gesture. There was no concept of wind and clouds in the world that resonated with it, nor was there any majestic scene of flying sand and rolling stones in the surroundings. Wang Xianji withdrew his gaze and gently exhaled. His eardrums vibrated violently. After the 2 punches, the person who had passed through the divine gate did not pursue and attack. He only paused slightly 7,000 feet away, waiting for Wang Xianji to stabilize his body before he began his 3rd attack. Step by step, he left a footprint, but he did not step on the ground. Instead, he walked in the air, like a string of water ripples made by a stone. He was several feet above the ground, forming circles of airflow ripples. Every step he took was like a great bell striking Wang Xianji's heart. Not only did Wang Xianji's eardrums vibrate more and more, even his temples began to sink and protrude. Wang Xianji still did not show any signs of punching. He waited until the person took the last leap, crossing 1,000 feet in one step, and stepped heavily on the ground. He had accumulated his strength to the extreme and punched. Wang Xianji's eardrums and temples suddenly stopped moving at the same time. Only then did he punch out. The 2 fists collided. There was a loud bang. Between the 2 fists, a lake surface, spread out by the majestic Qi appeared horizontally. This thin lake surface was ferocious and distorted, and the earth-shaking sound spread through the wilderness. A few winter sparrows circled low in the air and inadvertently hit this wall of Qi. They were immediately torn and shattered beyond recognition. Wang Xianji's face, which did not show any signs of aging, wrinkled like the lake water. Layers of subtle undulations appeared on his face, and then slowly returned to normal. The arms of the 2 who had punched out swung back at the same time. Then they changed hands and punched at the same time. It was almost another winter thunder that shook the plains. Wang Xianji smiled slightly and gently withdrew his hand. The person shook his arm and did not pester endlessly. Neither of them moved, but the distance between them was increasing. A trench was torn open in the ground, its width and length gradually rising. Wang Xianji slowly asked, "Should I call you the Prince of Bailiang or the great Emperor Zhenwu?" A young man with a pair of sparkling golden eyes smiled and said, "Su Fengnian is fine." Wang Xianji looked at the strange eyes of the young man that were gradually dimming. His qi floated behind him like a long rainbow. The old man said with some regret, "So it's only for the time it takes to burn a stick of incense. I don't even know who set the rules. Boring." Su Fengnian mocked, "If you want to be interesting, why don't you go to the heavens and find a deity to fight?" Wang Xianji smiled and said, "Decaying grass becomes fireflies. Even if there really is a deity who ascends to the heavens, he may not be a good person." Su Fengnian asked, "Do you want to lose a fight in the human world so that you can willingly cross the heavenly gate?" Wang Xianji shook his head and said clearly, "Born as a human, dead as a ghost, this is the most realistic truth. As for whether deities are deities or not, in this old man's eyes, they are nothing more than thieves who are greedy for life and afraid of death. Those who steal a hook will be punished, those who steal a country will be marquis, those who steal life will be deities. Therefore, this old man is only willing to believe half of the talk about ghosts and deities." Su Fengnian waved his hand and said, "Let's not talk about this nonsense. It's very easy for you to kill me now. What do you say?" Wang Xianji smiled and asked, "Do you have a chance to recover your previous state?" Su Fengnian said helplessly, "It's difficult." Wang Xianji nodded and said, "As long as there is, this old man will wait for you in the Eastern Sea next time." Su Fengnian saw that the old man was about to turn around and asked, "You didn't fight with Xueqi?" Wang Xianji still turned around and left. Su Fengnian swallowed a mouthful of blood and staggered back. At the heavenly gate, Jiang and I pulled out the great Liang dragonfinch with a hesitant expression. Not far from her, the white-robed Luo Yang squatted on the ground and grabbed a handful of soil, looking into the distance. Jiang and I raised her hand and controlled the red sandalwood sword box. She placed the great Liang dragonfinch on her back. Luo Yang stood up and clapped her hands. She turned around and looked at the woman who had really overturned the country 800 years ago. She sneered and said, "You're still the same kind of skin that makes men feel pity for you. But compared to the past, you have more heart and lungs now." Jiang and I was confused by her words. She had a natural dislike for this white-robed woman. She immediately glared and said, "Why do you care?" Luoyang raised his hand inexplicably and made a gesture to raise his glass and drink it in one gulp. He laughed and then asked, "Are you thirsty?" Jiang and I did not want to lower herself to the same level as this crazy woman. She caught a glimpse of the approaching figure from the corner of her eyes. She bit her lips and turned around resolutely. Su Fengnian stopped and closed his eyes. That year, the woman named Shan who was chosen as a tribute and sent into the palace, timidly walked on the path behind him and the Empress of Great Qin. She had yet to drink that cup of poisoned wine. Su Fengnian opened his eyes and rubbed his face. He continued to walk until he reached Luo Yang's side. Lu Haoshi, who Su Fengnian had mistakenly thought would escape back to Great Peace City, had his head chopped off by a hand blade and was kicked forward by the little girl. Chapter 863. Today's chapter. There will be a total of 6 chapters in the next 2 days. Su Fengnian originally wanted to end Jianghu with the battle at the Spring God Lake. This was already worthy of the saber training he had put in for the past few years. After returning to Bailiang, it would be difficult for him to be completely focused. He had reached the 4th realm of the 1st rank and had already reached the false realm 3 times. Even if there was no one else who could do it in the future, it was still an unprecedented feat. Su Fengnian no longer had any hopes of increasing his realm in the future. It was enough for him to be a local tyrant in Bailiang. But he never thought that the real game would be so tragic. Song Yanqing died in battle after being struck by an earth immortal. Lu Haoshi's celestial Shatterer realm even had to fight with Wang Xianji in the end. Su Fengnian stood quietly beside the white-clothed demon. He had already returned all his cultivation to Luo Yang. She had lost a lot of her realm. She should still be the 4th in the world, but the gap between her and Hong Jingyan and the others had inevitably shrunk. Su Fengnian himself was poor. His inner energy that had fallen to the 2nd rank was almost gone. If the body was a building full of qi, then Su Fengnian could be said to be a house with 4 bare walls. Lu Haoshi had destroyed the purple aura golden lotus seedling in the big yellow pond. This made him even more miserable. Su Fengnian silently recited the incantation. He tried to use the fire that he had comprehended in Beimang to condense his qi and observe the fire inside his body. Unfortunately, some of the fire started from the Yongquan acupoint under his feet. It was like an arrow at the end of its flight. It couldn't even pass through the Naiwan. Su Fengnian's expression withered and he gave up struggling. A breeze blew across the countryside. The smell of soil assaulted his nose. Su Fengnian's hands and feet were cold. He could only put his hands in his sleeves to ward off the cold. Luo Yang asked indifferently, "How strong is Wang Xianji?" Su Fengnian stomped his feet and looked at the sky. He said softly, "Old monster Wang only used 50% of his strength when he took the 2 punches. In the end, he used about 80% of his strength." Luo Yang didn't comment on this. She calmly said, "I'll take Danning back to Zhulu Mountain. We'll meet outside the city 3 years later. You only have a few flying swords that Dong Tai gave you, so don't die on the way back." He didn't die at the hands of Song Yanqing and Lu Hao, and he didn't die at the hands of Wang Xianji. If he died at the hands of a nobody, it would be a big joke. Su Fengnian smiled calmly and said, "It is true that I do not have any backup plans, but the Zhao family's son of heaven is also at his wit's end. Without Han Diaoxi and Lu Haoshi, 2 top experts, Great Peace City is only slightly better than paper. If I were Chao Chongqing, I would go directly to Jing and take the emperor's head. The Jianghu matters are over. In the future, it will depend on how Bailiang deals with each move. My martial cultivation is not important to the overall situation." Standing side by side, Luo Yang said disdainfully, "In terms of family wealth, can your Su family beat the Zhao family? If Chao Chongqing dares to go to Great Peace City to cause trouble now, he probably won't have the life to revive his country." Su Fengnian frowned and said, "Isn't there only the sneaky Wu family sword tomb left for the court to support?" Luo Yang smiled coldly and asked, "That's it?" Su Fengnian said emotionally, "Yes, My mother comes from the Wu family. Dong Tai is also from the Wu family. Wu Lu Ding and his sword attendant Chui Hua are also from the Wu family. Song Yanqing's 14th sword already had such spirit. I think the master of the Su of Gojosian sword must be even more profound. Luo Yong hesitated and asked, "Why don't you practice sword essence?" Su Fengnian said self-mockingly, "I have seen too many sword masters. It's not that I don't want to, it's that I don't dare." Su Fengnian suddenly came back to his senses. It's sword essence, not the sword? But Luo Yong had already disappeared. Standing where he was, Su Fengnian looked around. The world was clear, and the atmosphere was bleak. He was in a daze. After an unknown amount of time, he slowly closed his eyes and remembered many things of the past, many people of the past. His mind flashed to the scene where he had personally borrowed the sword at Yuyan Mountain Villa, Lu Songtao's useless song after his madness, and personally seeing the world and the city merge into a line. When a person had too much money, they would often be dazzled and not know what to treasure. Su Fengnian raised his arm and waved like he was pushing away an item on a messy table. The mountains. Disperse. He did not see Wudong, Longhu, Hui Mountain, or any of the famed mountains. After waving away the mountains in his mind, Su Fengnian waved a second time. The rivers and seas. Disperse. He did not see Chunshen, Boyang, Qingdu, or any of the Jianghu. He waved a third time. The towers. Disperse. He did not see Xiangfan, Shenwu, Great Pea City, or any of the city's tall buildings. The fourth wave pushed back the grass and trees. The fifth wave pushed back the sun and moon. The sixth wave pushed back all life in the world. In this moment, Su Fengnian seemed to be alone in the world. His eyes were still closed, but he was looking around in the darkness, searching for something. When Su Fengnian thought that he was going to return empty-handed, he suddenly realized that he could not open his eyes. It was like the many times when he encountered a ghost during his afternoon nap before practicing the blade. No matter how hard he tried, he could not open his eyes and regain clarity. It was clearly a sign of going astray. In the past, Su Fengnian had the great yellow court of Taoism. No matter how heterogeneous or unconventional his cultivation was, he did not have to worry about falling into Qigong deviation. But now, the great yellow court no longer existed. It was the moment when Su Fengnian's foundation was the most unstable. He had a sudden idea. He wanted to take advantage of the lingering effect after the peak battle with Wang Xianji to grab that rare enlightenment. He hoped that he could reach the sky in one step and directly enter the false realm of celestial phenomenon or even the land immortal. He wanted to learn from the Qi cultivators and obtain that fleeting and rare enlightenment. More haste, less speed. Moreover, Su Fengnian had experienced the false realm 3 times. Every time he ascended the realm, he should be walking on thin ice. Outsiders did not dare to imagine that someone would be as reckless as Su Fengnian. It was tantamount to courting death. Since he could not wake up, Su Fengnian actually laughed in the false realm that he did not know the depth of. Previously, he had brushed away the mountains and rivers. At this moment, he slowly hugged and gradually retracted all the mountains and rivers. It was said that it was easier to invite the spirit than to send it away. However, Su Fengnian found that the universe was completely reversed in this realm. Fortunately, he was not in a hurry. According to common sense, whether it was martial arts or the way of heaven, it was taboo to be unsettled. Su Fengnian simply did the opposite and let it go. Vaguely, Su Fengnian seemed to see Song Yanqing, who was holding a pair of cloth shoes, being carried into a carriage by a group of desolate sword pool disciples. He saw the back of a young girl kicking ahead. He saw a monk in a cassock flying over. He saw a white-clothed woman in a red robe returning and returning. Then, Su Fengnian's vision was instantly cast thousands of miles away. He saw a young and elegant Taoist priest guarding a grave. He also saw the ebb and flow of the South Sea. A middle-aged swordsman cleaved the waves with his sword. He also saw a horse that was neither a horse nor a deer climbing up the mountain and arriving in front of the Taoist master's mansion. Finally, he saw a young child squatting by the river in a daze outside a small village with beautiful scenery. Suddenly, he was enlightened and his spiritual qi overflowed. When he returned to the village and saw the red paper cut on a window, the child felt an inexplicable joy. Su Fengnian finally opened his eyes and wiped his face. Unknowingly, his face was covered in tears. Chapter 864. I still owe 5 chapters. There was a rider riding towards the quick snow mountain villa. The horse's hooves were light and agile. The young rider wore a red fox fur hat with 2 strands of black and white hair hanging down from his temples. There was a short knife in a black sheath at his waist. The rider and the horse were not in a hurry to enter the villa. Instead, they dismounted and walked along the blue stone boards beside the spring god lake. It was noon and the sun was warm. The winter snow had melted and the lake water was as clear as a mirror. There was an endless stream of people enjoying the scenery. The changes in the quick snow mountain villa were too much for the eyes to take in. There was a series of rumors. When the Zhenwu Great Emperor's Dharma form arrived at the lake, it was first the young master of the Yanbao Castle, Li Huali, who led an urgent military order to return to the border with his elite cavalry and squires. Then, Xianxia of the Spring Invitation Cottage also left the villa. Yuqi Liangfu said that this old senior from the cottage had comprehended something while watching the lake and wanted to return to Shu to cultivate in seclusion. There was a chance for her to reach the celestial state in this lifetime. Li Yibai of the Dongyue sword pool also said that he wanted to welcome his teacher, Song Yanqing, but his whereabouts were unknown. The Quick Snow Mountain Villa originally wanted to use the election of the Wulin Alliance to raise its reputation and status. With the departure of the 3 leaders one after another, it was about to become the laughingstock of the entire Jianghu. However, the appearance of the purple-clothed woman from Mount Hui, who had defeated 16 famous masters in a single day, was unparalleled in the limelight. It vaguely seemed like it wanted to take advantage of the situation to become the champion. This made many Jianghu people who were on their way back to the villa turn their horses around and rush into the Quick Snow Mountain Villa. This undoubtedly solved the urgent situation of the villa. If one didn't take a closer look, in this era where people relied on their clothes and Buddha relied on gold, a wandering swordsman with a saber on his horse was not eye-catching in the crowd. Most of the Jianghu people who could come to the Xueqi Mountain Villa were heroes. Most of them relied on their sex background or their own names. Even if they couldn't be the richest in their hometown, they couldn't escape from being rich. Along the lakeside, there were plenty of Jianghu people wearing embroidered fox fur coats. If they didn't wear a mink hat that easily cost dozens of taels of silver, they would be too embarrassed to go out and greet others. Many beautiful women followed the heroes around, their eyes wandering, secretly comparing their wealth. There were also some Jianghu people who came with their wives and children. These people were undoubtedly more confident. Most of them were the direct descendants of the first and second-class sects in Jianghu. Those mischievous children who didn't have the slightest bit of stage fright ignored their parents' warnings and played around, as if they were passing through flowers to attract butterflies. Perhaps these children themselves didn't even know that there was a saying in the imperial court about the children of officials and the children of generals. They were equivalent to the children of aristocratic families in Jianghu. In the future, they would inherit their father's legacy and roam Jianghu. Obviously, they would be more successful than other people. The bustling Bluestone Road was filled with polite greetings from people who had long heard of their names, as well as people who were familiar with each other. A few pairs of children who happened to be good friends with their fathers quickly became familiar with each other. They ran amok together, laughing and chatting happily. Occasionally, they bumped into Jianghu people who were usually violent and ruthless, but today, they didn't mind putting on a rough smile and even reached out to rub the children's heads in a friendly manner. The children cleverly ran past with their heads bowed. Behind them, the helpless faces of their fathers didn't forget to cup their fists and smile at the men. If both sides were indifferent, they would pass by with a smile. If they were more clever, they would stop and exchange names. If it was convenient, they wouldn't have to spend a single copper coin to form a dispensable relationship. The group of children were like a few merrily swimming fish between the gaps of the crowd, becoming more and more intense. They had some foundation in lightness skill, so when they were in the mood, they unconsciously used their family's lightness skill. Coincidentally, someone was leading a horse and standing by the lake, looking at the vast and misty spring god lake. When the leading child was about to hit the horse's belly, he grabbed the horse's back with both hands and deftly flipped over, continuing to run forward. It was quite a stunning sight. Behind him, a young girl with long hair followed suit and flipped over the horse's back. The last child didn't have the same foundation, but he didn't want to take a detour, so he couldn't leap over and hit the horse's belly, falling to the ground. It wasn't clear whether it was because of the pain or because he felt that he had lost face in front of his childhood sweetheart, but he sat on the ground and wailed loudly. The young man with the red fox fur hat on his head heard the noise and let go of the reins. He smiled and reached out to help the child up. The child raised his head and looked at the stranger. Perhaps he thought that the stranger's smile was mocking him, so he cried even more heartbreakingly. The young master probably had a bad horse and fur hat, so he didn't have the air of nobility. That was why he was smiling so warmly and apologetically. He didn't know what to do when faced with the rowdy children who were rolling all over the ground. The two older children who had already leaped over the horse also turned back, eyeing the young man covetously. The boy who had leaped onto the horse first had a face full of anger. At such a young age, he already had a heroic air that couldn't be underestimated. The girl with drooping hair was a beauty, so her temper was also much gentler. Seeing that the culprit didn't look like a bad person, she only glared at him. Naturally, she was naturally charming and went to help her companion who was covered in dust and mud. Although the child who was being helped up was crying loudly, in fact, he had been keeping his eyes and ears open. When his brother and sister came to support him, and his parents also quickly walked over behind him, he suddenly became bold. He ran over to the guy who was leading the horse and blocking the road and fiercely kicked that person's calf. The young master dismissed it with a smile and lowered his head to pat the dust off. He didn't expect that the child was still angry and slapped the person in front of him on the head, knocking off the fox fur hat that was obviously not worth much. Only then did he grin proudly. After the hat fell off, the young man in his 20s with a saber revealed a head of hair that was similar to the hair on his temples. It was actually the gray color of old age, giving him a lifeless appearance. The young man shook his head and didn't argue with the naughty child. He took a few steps forward and bent down to pick up the fox fur hat that they depended on each other for survival. Unexpectedly, a soft whip, like a snake spitting out its tongue, hooked onto the fox fur hat that was indeed cheap and unsightly in quality. The whip lifted up and threw the hat high up. Then, this whip, which was praised in Jianghu as a tiger's tail, was like a snake coiling around. The head of the whip and the body of the whip collided with each other, creating a sound like firecrackers. After the vibration, the whip suddenly straightened and bounced onto the fur hat, forcing the hat to fall back to its owner, which happened to cover the young man's head. This scene really lived up to the old saying that a virtuous horse would be bullied by others. The young man must have been shocked by the child's elder's move. Amidst the cheers of the surrounding people who wished for the world to be in chaos, he quietly stood up and straightened the fox fur hat. He didn't even glance at the strong man who was shaking his hand with a whip. Chapter 865. Seeing the young man retreating after causing trouble, the man whose family had been tyrannical for generations in Liaodong was too lazy to beat him up. He was born with a short stature, but his wife was tall and enchanting. Not to mention other things, just her slender legs almost reached his ribs. A woman of this height was rare even in the north, let alone in the south. What was even more remarkable was her well-proportioned body and her twin peaks. Even though she was wearing a thick fur coat, she was unwilling to be left out. Beside them were two pairs of celestial couples who had deep connections with their families. They were all in their 30s. The men were masculine while the women were graceful. When the four of them saw this scene, which could not be said to be harmonious, they looked at each other and smiled. They did not agree, but there was pity in their eyes. However, they did not say a word of justice for the young stranger. When roaming the Jianghu, one should help those close to him and not those who were reasonable. Almost no one noticed that the spineless young man quietly made an imperceptible gesture of waving his hand after leading the horse and before pressing down the fox fur hat. Except for Zhou Qinghu, who had been watching coldly, because this woman's eyes were fixed on Xueqi, whom she had met for the first time on the Dragon Tail slope. She could not understand how a man who could make dozens of big devils retreat in the face of difficulties, who could be invited by the devil cult to climb the mountain and be conferred the title of Marquis, could be so down and out. Zhou Qinghu hesitated for a moment and walked to the side of the man who continued to look at the bleak winter scenery of Spring Shin Lake. Su Zhan, who had been with her day and night these days, followed closely behind. Su Zhan, who carried an ancestral long stick on his back, walked a few steps and was quickly recognized by some sharp-eyed guys. These days, Snow Mountain Villa had set up several arenas on Spring Shin Lake that cost a lot of money. In addition to the main arena that was stolen by the purple clothes of Mount Hui Mountain, there were several smaller arenas, which were also full of masters. Su Zhan amazed everyone in one of the arenas. He fought with an old swordsman in the northwest for 400 rounds and still won. Then he successfully defended the arena for 4 consecutive rounds before being defeated by the famous swordsman in the southeast, Xiahui, who was thousands of miles above Su Zhan. Everyone suddenly remembered that Su Zhan's father, Su Dachu, had written Observing Skills scripture, and was once one of the top masters in the world. Because of Su Zhan's skills, the declining Su family was regarded by many martial arts seniors, especially masters in the Tuhui River, as the hope of the family's revival. The Liaodong swordsman who was shorter than his wife put away his soft whip. Seeing Su Zhan's sudden appearance, he thought for a moment and then laughed heartily. He took the initiative to ask, "Are you Su Zhan, young Master Su who carried forward the family's observing skill scripture?" Originally, Su Zhan did not have a good impression of these arrogant Jianghu heroes, but after being recognized, he still turned around, smiled and cupped his fists in return. He said, "I am Su Zhan. I have heard from my father's generation that the Feng family of Liaodong is full of masters. They can not only kill a tiger with one whip, but also have superb archery skills. Just the sound of pulling the bowstring can make birds startled and fall from the bough." When the illegitimate son of the Feng family of Liaodong heard these words, it could be said that he was tickled by Ma Gu, and it happened to tickle his itch. He felt comfortable all over. If it was someone else who flattered him, he would not take it to heart. But Su Zhan was different after all. He had profound knowledge that was not inferior to the Feng family of Liaodong. Su Zhan himself was also good at martial arts. In the future, he might not be unable to become a first-class master. Feng Maolin, who was famous only in the Liao and Liao regions, had excellent whip skills and archery skills. If the Feng family had not been disliked by Zhao Sui, the king of Jiaodong, it would not have been difficult for Feng Maolin to get a real power with his family's ability. This time, in order to avoid trouble, Feng Maolin did not take the Oxhorn Bow with him to find an opportunity to show his talent in the south to the Quick Snow Mountain Villa. Feng Maolin, who had not mastered the essence of the Feng family's whip skills, knew his own weight. It was very difficult for him to win many battles in a row like Su Zhan. It was difficult for him to stand out in Jianghu, but it was difficult for the sons of aristocratic families like Feng Maolin. Just because he was born of a concubine, he was suppressed by the son of the first wife. Practicing martial arts was a bottomless pit. A family with ambition to stand out in Jianghu could not take care of everything. Feng Maolin was like this, let alone the sons of ordinary families who practiced martial arts. The double expenses of medicinal materials to exercise their body, the double expenses of accumulating money or borrowing secret books, and the various expenses of moving famous masters to teach the family would make people speechless. Therefore, it was not bad for the sons of aristocratic families like Feng Maolin to practice martial arts. On the other side, Feng Maolin was trying to get close to Su Zhan. He introduced Su Zhan, who had become famous after one battle, to the husband and wife of the Feng family of Liaodong. They talked happily. Zhou Qinhu came to the young child who was standing still with his horse. He plucked up his courage and asked, "How did you change your personality? Why is your temper so good?" Su Fengnian turned his head to look at this old acquaintance of his in the Quick Snow Mountain Villa. He smiled and did not speak. Zhou Qinhu recalled that after surviving that series of dangerous situations, he realized that this young master with an obscure background did not seem to be a domineering person. No matter how Hu Chuanya rolled his eyes or provoked him, he did not see the slightest bit of anger. Zhou Qinhu glanced at the side of his face. For a moment, he was absent-minded. The reason why he was so calm in everything was because he did not care about the ups and downs of his group of people. Looking at the ups and downs of others' honor and disgrace was like watching children playing. Zhou Qinhu felt a little bored when she thought of this. She turned her head and saw Su Zhan talking and laughing with that group of people. They called each other brothers as if they regretted not having met each other earlier. During these days in the Quick Snow Mountain Villa, Zhou Qinhu had seen the fickleness of human nature. With Su Zhan's fame, she was lucky enough to live alone in a courtyard in the villa. People from all walks of life came to the courtyard to make friends. She could not rest for a moment. Su Zhan also beat around the bush. One time when they sat opposite each other and drank, he almost revealed his heart under the guise of alcohol. However, she still diverted the topic. Zhou Qinhu had a good impression of Su Zhan, who had gone through fire and water with her. Unfortunately, it was not the love between a man and a woman. Zhou Qinhu only wanted to take advantage of her youth to travel more in Jianghu and see more strange stories. It did not matter whether she was accompanied or alone. Perhaps one day, there would be a man who could make her fall in love at first sight. That would be the day she left Jianghu. There were 3 reasons why Su Fengnian returned to the Quick Snow Mountain Villa under the secret escort of the Men of Sacrifice. The first was to settle things with Lin Hongyuan of the Dragon Palace. She still owed him a Xian finger inscription. The second was to see if she could wait until the young hierarch Li Yufu to offer a toast to the wanderer He Zhu's grave on behalf of Miss He. Then she would inform Li Yufu about the child's first enlightenment by the stream. The last was that according to the secret letter, Shenyuan Qingfeng had slaughtered his opponents in the main arena and seemed to be on the verge of winning the championship. Earlier he had promised to let her sit on the throne of the Wulin Union. If there was a chance, he would help her. Su Fengnian herself didn't have many thoughts about Zhonghu. Other than the fact that the old bastard of the Zhao family hiding in Mount Longhu was not dead yet. Other than that battle in the Eastern Sea that he didn't know whether or not he could fight. And other than the fact that he still missed her and her at Mount Zhulu. He had nothing else to be interested in. Whether he was willing or not, he had to leave before the matter was over. Fortunately, this time he was going back to Bailiang with Su Xiao, who was waiting for him in Xiangfan. Chapter 866. Zhou Qinhu did not want to have too much to do with Su Qi, who was shrouded in clouds and mist. She glanced at the 2 strands of gray hair under his red fox fur hat and thought of an excuse to leave. In her heart, she had the natural sorrow of a woman. Those who practiced martial arts knew that thinking too much would consume one's qi and blood, which would not nourish one's bone marrow. However, Zhou Qinhu also knew her own limitations. The martial arts that she practiced would definitely not enter his eyes. While she was hesitating, she saw a young ranger with a wine pot hanging from his waist stride over. He slapped Su Qi's shoulder and laughed, calling out Su Qi's name. Then he turned to her and said respectfully, "Miss Zhou's yellow plum sword, I am Huang Liang, an anonymous disciple of Pure Heart Pavilion. Your reputation is like thunder in my ears." Su Fengnian saw Zhou Qinhu's puzzled look and explained with a smile. "Brother Huang is a friend I met on the way to the snowy hills. He is an old Zhonghu man and has taught me many things by word and example. He is a kind person and is worth making friends with." In fact, Huang Liang had been quietly observing the situation from the side. When he saw Su Zhan being played by the group of heroes, he had completely lost the intention to greet him. He was afraid that he would get into trouble. But he did not expect that Zhou Qinhu, who had recently risen to fame along with Su Zhan, would take the initiative to walk to the side of the horse by the lake. Hearing Su Zhan say that he was kind, Huang Liang accepted all of it without any guilt. After Zhou Qinhu heard Su Fengnian's words, she greeted this rogue Zhonghu ranger out of courtesy. Su Fengnian picked up the reins and prepared to ride along the lake to find Lin Hongyuan, who had once held an ivory tablet in his hand and pretended to be a ghost. In addition to the dispensable stone inscription finger, Su Fengnian also had a newly learned interesting secret that he wanted to test Lin Hongyuan face to face. However, before Su Fengnian had a chance to escape, Su Zhan and Deng Maolin had arrived with their companions. Obviously, the son of a concubine from the Feng family of Liaodong had given Su Zhan face. He took the initiative to ask his young son to apologize to Su Fengnian, and then said that he wanted to board a colorful boat to watch the new round of the purple dress battle on the lake. Several arenas were built on the lake several miles away from the lake, and the spectators had to take a boat to watch the battle. However, the number of boats was limited, so boarding a boat did not depend on money, but on one's status in Zhonghu and family's reputation. Every boat had a famous prostitute from the brothels of Xiangfan City. In order to build up the popularity of the Snowy Heights, Villa Master Weiqi Liangfu had put in a lot of effort. Most of the spectators from Zhonghu did not have the ability to board a boat, and could only rent a small boat to ride between the big boats. However, there was a huge difference between riding a small boat and riding a boat, and it was not a pleasant feeling to be inferior to others. On the way to the ferry, Su Fengnian learned that Feng Maolin was from a wealthy family in Liaodong through Su Zhan's concise but clever introduction. The other 2 pairs of immortal heroes came from similar backgrounds, one from the Huai family, and the other from the southern Tang aristocratic family. There was an insurmountable gap between aristocratic families and aristocratic families, but for most of the people in Zhonghu, it was not easy. It was like a prostitute, but an official prostitute was naturally more valuable than a private prostitute. When Huang Liang was traveling with Su Fengnian, there was nothing he did not know about astronomy and geography. But now he was very cautious and nervous, and did not even dare to speak loudly. Especially when he was interrupted by Deng Maolin before he could finish his self-recommendation. Huang Liang did not take it seriously, and obediently followed behind the crowd. Taking advantage of the fact that the people in front of him could not see him, he put on a high and mighty air and cast sidelong glances at the people around him. When they boarded the boat, Su Fengnian was in a bit of a dilemma. He wanted to board the boat with the horse, but the little steward of Quick Snow Mountain Villa, who was in charge of all the affairs of the boat, did not take the Feng family of Liaodong seriously at all. How could he let a nobody from Jianghu bring an inferior horse to board the boat? Besides, did he know how much a seat could be sold for nowadays? This C-class boat cost 400 taels of silver. And it was priceless. Su Fengnian did not want to complicate things. After everyone had boarded the boat, he handed the horse's reins to a handyman of the villa, stuffed a piece of silver into his hand, and said, "I'm Zhu Jing from the Dragon Palace. Little brother, please inform a woman from the Dragon Palace named Lin Hongyuan that I'm on this C-class boat. If she has time, tell her to wait for me at this ferry." When the servant heard the words Dragon Palace, he immediately looked at the young man with a higher opinion. Dongyue Sword Pond, Chunty Cottage, and Wild Goose Castle left one after another. At this moment, the Dragon Palace was considered one of the top sects in the villa, and he could not afford to offend any of the people in it, even if they were just cats and dogs. He quietly restrained his arrogance, weighed the weight of the silver, and deliberately put on a troubled face. "Young Master Zhua, I have a hard life. I may not be able to leave for a while, and I'm afraid that I will delay your important business." Su Fengnian did not change his smile, and handed over the second piece of silver. "Sorry to trouble you, little brother." He didn't expect that the young servant was also a quick-witted character. He pushed back the second piece of silver and said with a smile, "I have received 10 taels of silver from young Master Zhua. I don't feel bad about the money, but I also want to take advantage of the opportunity to get some immortal aura. If I ask for more, then I will be seen as a man who is not content with money. Our Snow Mountain Villa has strict rules. If by any chance the steward finds out, he will break my hands and feet. Young Master Zhua, don't worry. I will go and report to you. As for young Master's precious steed, this humble one will also have the stable feed it." This was the foundation of a noble family. A servant would be influenced by what he saw and heard, and his conduct would more or less reveal a sense of impartiality. Before the spring and autumn period, the people who sat on the dragon throne had changed one after another. The 10 great clans had always been able to rise and fall as the tide rose and fell. The reason why they were able to stand firm was because of the accumulation of all aspects behind the main branch and the side branch. Su Fengnian looked at the young servant who led the horse away. Suddenly, a thought came to his mind. Would such a guy, who was good at currying favor and was born in poverty, one day have a romantic relationship with a lady from a noble family like Yuchuan? Su Fengnian shook his head and turned back to board the boat. The double-decker colorful boat retracted its ladder, broke through the green lake, and slowly sailed toward the arena. Among the 7 or 8 colorful boats in the distance, 2 of them were 3-storied boats. Su Fengnian stood at the stern of the boat with his hands in his sleeves, silently resisting the bone-chilling breeze that caressed his face. Huang Liang was thick-skinned. Since he could not please the unapproachable couples, he went to play with the 3 children. The child who kicked Su Fengnian said he wanted to ride a horse. So, Huang Liang got down on all fours and let the child ride on his waist. Huang Liang smiled brightly. He looked like a dog. Su Fengnian used to laugh at Huang Liang's clumsy showing off in his mind, but this time, he could not laugh. Zhou Qinhu could not stand the utilitarian laughter of Su Zhan and the others, so she came out to take a breath of fresh air and stood by the railing near Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian smiled and asked, "Miss Zhou, you have earned the name of Huang Mei Sword?" Chapter 867. At first, Zhou Qinhu thought he was mocking her, but seeing his calm smile and not knowing how to respond, she did not respond. Although she understood the ways of the world, she did not want to do things against her will and speak against her will. This made people feel that she was cold and distant. In fact, to be able to escort Huang Shang to the capital, one could see that she was a warm-hearted and kind-hearted woman. Su Fengnian hid his hands in his sleeves and gently leaned on the railing. He squinted his eyes and smiled. "When I was young, I always wanted to be a famous hero. I wanted to be the type where women would fall in love with me wherever I went. That's why I often discussed with my 2 elder sisters what kind of nickname we should use when we roam the Jianghu in the future. At that time, we wrote down dozens of names on a piece of paper, but we were not satisfied with any of them. They were either not imposing enough or too obscure. I also thought that it would be good to find a beautiful heroine to be my wife. Later, I found out that it was not easy to be a heroine. Practicing martial arts all year round, it was difficult to have tender skin. Not to mention other things, just looking at how awe-inspiring she was when she rode a horse would cause her but to have calluses. What's more, He had to worry about those followers who prostrated themselves under the skirt of a pomegranate. If by any chance he encountered a highly skilled flower thief, or a local hedonistic son of a rich family who was fond of heroines, it would be even more of a headache. I remember the first time I roamed Jianghu. I saw a famous one. Her makeup was so thick that you could smell it from miles away. Her entire body, from the hairpins on her face to the bracelets on her hands, from the clothes on her feet to the boots on her feet, she had a good background. Afterwards, I found out that every shop paid her at least 100 or 200 taels of silver every year. Over time, I did not believe in heroines. I felt that calling a woman a heroine was like scolding her. Zhou Qinhu smiled sweetly. Su Fengnian sighed. Jianghu is actually very similar to the old western Shu. Before the world was in chaos, Shu was in chaos. The duck knows when the spring river is warm. When the central government is in turmoil, it will inevitably affect other places. Even before the central government is settled, Jianghu is already in a state of panic. Those large and small gangs in Jianghu find a husband early and enjoy life early. Those who marry late or not often do not have the family background to support them. Most of them will be bullied. From the small fish and shrimp of the fish dragon gang to the sword-making family of the Yuyan mountain villa, none of them were spared. I heard that the young king of Jing'an in Shangfan City is interested in taking a concubine. I don't know how long the snow mountain villa can last. Zhou Qinhu suddenly went straight to the point and asked, "Young Master Su, may I ask if the Dongyue Sword Pond Cottage and Wild Goose Castle leaving the villa together has anything to do with you?" Su Fengnian asked in return, "Miss Zhou thinks so highly of me? Why don't you just ask me if I invited Great Emperor Zhenwu?" Zhou Qinghu was about to speak when Su Fengnian smiled and said, "By the way, I'm temporarily a minion of the Dragon Palace in the old southern Tang Empire. My name is Zhou Jing. If someone asks about me in the future, Miss Zhou can answer this way." Zhou Qinhu nodded. Su Fengnian turned around and saw Huang Liang, who was crawling on the outside of the ship, with a calm expression on his face. Zhou Qinhu did not see the slightest fluctuation in his beautiful peach blossom eyes. Not to mention the reasonable disdain and ridicule, she did not even feel pity for him. Zhou Qinhu said his goodbyes and walked into the warm as spring cabin. Su Fengnian leaned on the railing again, feeling bored. So, he softly hummed a nameless tune that was widely circulated in Bailiang. "Don't you see the fishes in the northern underworld swim for tens of thousands of miles? Don't you see the immortals at the peak of Kunlun pass through the Heaven's Gate? Don't you see the men riding lightly out of the cold and returning with their corpses? Don't you see the women leaning on the door until their hair turns white?" Since there were men of sacrifice secretly escorting him, Su Fengnian did not deliberately suppress his sleepiness. He rested his chin on his sleeves that were still warm from his hands and closed his eyes. A small boat with a black canopy quickly cut across the calm lake. A woman dressed in green and holding a white hat leaped onto the colorful boat and stood at the other side of the stern. With a complicated look in her eyes, she called out softly, "Young Master Zhua." Su Fengnian opened his eyes and turned his head without turning around. "Young Palace Master Lin, I'm honored by your presence. Forgive me for not welcoming you." The young woman, who had never shown up in the Quick Snow Mountain Villa as Lin Hongyuan, now had a look of respect from the bottom of her heart. Compared to when they had first met, the look in her eyes was one of hatred. In Lin Hongyuan's mind, Zhao Ningxian was the reincarnation of the founder of the first generation of Longhu Mountain. He would definitely become the #1 person in the world in the future. With the addition of Yu Yiqing, he would have more weight than His Royal Highness in the bitter cold of the northern region. Lin Hongyuan was a woman who didn't remember good things or bad things. However, if she was really hit hard and hurt, she would still remember a little. Previously, when she got along with that bastard surnamed Su, her schemes were seen through every time. That guy wouldn't show any mercy to her. Now, Lin Hongyuan didn't know whether she hated him more or was afraid of him more. Lin Hongyuan, who had changed into the face of a female official of the Dragon Palace, was about to move. Su Fengnian said, "I received a secret report that the eldest son of Zhao Bing, king of Yanqi, was hiding in the team of the Dragon Palace. He should not be the bearded man. So you are really arrogant to let the crown prince carry the bed for you." Lin Hongyuan's face suddenly turned pale. Su Fengnian looked at the small boat with a black canopy following the colorful boat. Master Hao was an ordinary strong man. Su Fengnian waved to him. The young man hesitated for a moment and jumped onto the stern. After no longer hiding, he suddenly became high-spirited and heroic. He waved to Lin Hongyuan, making the woman who wanted to say something but hesitated to keep quiet. In the vast Nanjiang, Nalan Yusi could come and go as he pleased with Zhao Bing. King of Yanqi, only His Royal Highness favored him and regarded him as a friend of the same generation. In terms of reputation, this Zhao Zhu His Royal Highness was better than the first Prince Zhao Wu. If it was a few years ago, if anyone compared Zhao Zhu with Su Fengnian of Bailiang, it was tantamount to insulting His Royal Highness of King of Yanqi. Zhao Zhu grinned and said, "Xianxia, do you remember the little beggar who wanted to learn sword from your mother in Dantong Pass?" Su Fengnian said flatly, "I don't remember." Zhao Zhu looked resentful. He squatted on the ground and bit his finger, sighing. Lin Hongyuan was flabbergasted. In Nanjiang, there was a secret message circulating in a small circle. It said that the reason why Mr. Nalan was willing to stay in King of Yanqi was that he liked Zhao Zhu's ambition to go north. Zhao Zhu joined the army at the age of 12. Ever since his father, the king, helped him build his first small tomb with several heads to show off his military exploits, Zhao Zhu had killed people like flies, gathered the corpses of his enemies, and sealed the tall tombs. In the past few years, he had built a total of 21 temples. All the barbarians in Nanjiang surrendered. Zhao Zhu's favorite thing to do was never to pretend to be cultured, but to secretly go south with dozens of retainers. Often, he would go and come back for a month, uprooting the enemy's strongholds hidden deep in the miasma, leaving no survivors. Every time His Highness didn't show up for a banquet or event, everyone immediately understood that His Highness had slipped away to slaughter people again. But at this time, facing Su Fengnian, Zhao Zhu didn't know why he was so gentle, respectful, and thrifty. He raised his head and said sadly, "Xianxia, you're no longer the good brother who took off his pants to compare size with me." Su Fengnian scolded, "Is there a brother who owes money for more than 10 years and doesn't pay it back?" Zhao Zhu immediately laughed and threw a bag of copper coins to Su Fengnian. "Here. When we parted, you said that you wanted to be a hero. You also told me earnestly that I shouldn't become an old beggar. I've always remembered it in my heart. I didn't want to spend a single coin in this bag of copper coins." Su Fengnian caught the cloth pouch that was sewn together and was speechless. Chapter 868. The man surnamed Jiang almost vomited blood. Ji Luan was the palace master of Dragon Palace, and Cheng Baishuang was the #1 guest. They were the top masters in Nanjiang. Lin Hongyuan had always had the reputation of young palace master Lin. Any one of them was an unattainable bodhisattva. The Jiang family didn't even have the time to burn incense and pray to God. How could they have the courage to provoke them? This surly man kept saying that he didn't know them. King don't know them, but you still said a bunch of catchy words. When the bigwigs of the Dragon Palace went out, there would be female officials holding ceremonial rites to clear the way. Moreover, this woman spoke in a familiar local accent, which made the man surnamed Jiang realize in hindsight. He had to remind the Feng couple not to overestimate themselves. Not only would they lose face, but they would also cause his family to be punished and ostracized so that they could not have a foothold in the southern Tang world. Who didn't know that Dragon Palace was Mr. Nalan's favorite maid? If the fairy-like Mr. Nalan heard it, his whole family would be drowned. Zhao Zhu pointed to the child in the woman's arms. "You want to find Yuqi Liangfu to reason. No problem. Leave the baby and throw the body in front of Yuqi Liangfu. You will definitely be in the right even if you don't want to." Su Fengnian said, "That's enough." The sterns suddenly became silent. Zhao Zhu drank honestly, and Lin Hongyuan didn't say anything. Feng Maolin also understood the situation. After weighing the pros and cons, he chose to suffer in silence. He broke away from his friend's support and staggered back to the cabin. According to the cultivation method passed down from his ancestors, he operated his qi and breathed out the old and took in the new. Su Fengnian asked, "Zhao Zhu, how did you become a beggar?" "I remember that at that time, although the dragon's descendants lived in fear, they didn't have to worry about food and clothing." Zhao Zhu threw the empty wine pot into the lake, rubbed his cheeks, and said with a smile, "It's a long story. Anyway, now my brothers must be secretly wondering why I didn't starve to death in Dantong Pass." Every family had its own difficulties. Once it was mentioned, it would be awkward and painful. Lin Hongyuan stood in the distance and felt relieved. Since Su and His Royal Highness were old acquaintances, the key point was that anyone with a discerning eye could see that it was a genuine friendship and not a pretense of civility. Then whether or not he taught Su's secret steel inscription of the Dragon Palace was of no importance. He didn't need to worry about being caught by others in the future. However, Lin Hongyuan was a little disappointed. It seemed that he couldn't hope to make Su into a human puppet in this lifetime. Su Fengnian turned around and looked at this guy who was not in Nanjiang.
Do you have nothing better to do than to be Lin Hongyuan's servant?
Leaning on the railing, Zhao Zhu lazily said, I've never been in the pugilistic world, so I won't have any chances in the future. As for doing odd jobs for Lin Hongyuan, I'll just take it as learning from you that you have a tender heart for the fairer sex. I can't just walk around and say that I'm Zhao Zhu. Heroes of Jianghu. Come and kill me if you can. Su Fengnian smiled knowingly. I have a deep understanding of this. Zhao Zhu softly said, I originally wanted to sneak a trip to Beiliang. I wanted to go to my aunt's grave and burn 3 incense sticks no matter what. My father also agreed and said that I'll take his share. However, it seems that I can't go. You also know that West Chu is about to be reinstated. My father temporarily decided to let me lead 8,000 elite cavalry north to loot a burning house. If you came 2 days later, we would have passed by each other. Su Fengnian self-deprecatingly said, It won't be peaceful again. I don't understand why Chao Chongqing wants to reinstate the country. Zhao Zhu gazed into the distance and said indifferently, It's not strange at all. It's just like how the people of the world don't understand why Uncle Su is still unwilling to betray Li Yong and directly defected to Northern Mang, even though our Zhao family is making things difficult for your Su family. Su Fengnian smiled and said, Let's not talk about surrendering to Bei Mang. How many people can we bring with us? 300,000 cavalry. However, a person should still have a bottom line. Zhao Zhu turned around and leaned against the railing. He asked, Xiaoyan, do you know what I admire the most about Uncle Su? Su Fengnian handed the half-empty wine pot to Zhao Zhu. Zhao Zhu raised his head and took a big gulp before throwing it to Lin Hongyuan. Su Fengnian said, Is it because he didn't draw a river to conquer? Zhao Zhu sighed heavily and said, After I took charge of the army alone, I often deduced the battle situation with Mr. Naylan. Every time, I was on Uncle Su's side and adopted the strategy of drawing a river to claim the throne. Without exception, I suffered a crushing defeat. At first, I thought that my calculation was not meticulous enough, but even last year, I still lost. I admit that Uncle Su's cavalry, no matter how powerful they are, lost because they are still an isolated army, isolated scholars, isolated people, and isolated orthodoxy. Once they claim the throne, they will be isolated. If they don't claim the throne, they will disappoint many generals and soldiers. Once they claim the throne, they won't be conspicuous at first, but as long as they lose their irresistible morale, their decline will soon be exposed. Everyone will kick a man who is down. They won't even have the extravagant hope of making a comeback. Mr. Naylan once said that if a commoner wants to sit on the throne, he will have to wait for the cold people to get used to power. Therefore it will take at least 300 or 400 years. Uncle Su was born at the wrong time. Otherwise, I would be chatting with the crown prince right now. Su Fengnian fell into deep thought. Zhao Zhu suddenly asked with a cold smile, Xiaoyan, how did you become a clay bodhisattva without anger? Is it because Beiliang is too cold? Su Fengnian calmly said, back then, when Su Shao pulled a group of people out of Liaodong, he couldn't do it without money. So, he borrowed money from many people. Many people felt that the money couldn't be borrowed and would definitely be wasted. So they simply closed their doors and refused to visit. Only the Feng family and the other 2 families were thin-skinned at that time. They couldn't endure Su Zhao's pestering. Together, they gave him more than 60 taels of silver. Although Su Shao secretly returned a few favors after he became famous, he still talked to me about the dozens of taels of silver. He said that it was more important than the 10,000 taels of gold that he would get in the future. If it weren't for those pitiful pieces of silver, he almost didn't have the determination to leave Liaodong. Zhao Zhu nodded and sighed. I understand. ### this month's update. Last month, I owed 5 chapters. This month, I will slowly make up for it. In December, I will go abroad for almost 10 days. Therefore my goal is not high. I will only write 1 chapter every day. The chapter of White Dragon Suit was not included in today's update. Therefore, I still owe 4 chapters. Author's note. Xueqi is still Xueqi. Reading is like meeting people. Some people may find it boring at first, but they will continue to read. Occasionally, they will be very satisfied. Some people will be shocked at first sight. Then, they will continue to ask the woman to be otherworldly and put on airs like a fairy. Over time, they will be disappointed. Xueqi is a story of beads. Those who are even more impatient can just change the book and pick it up when they remember it. #### chatting while writing. If I don't promise to update, I won't break my promise. It's a very simple reason. However, after weighing the two options, I will either be scolded for not keeping my promise or have to calm down and write. After weighing the two options, I feel that it is more worth it to write more chapters. First, let me explain something. In the past, when I wrote books, there was absolutely no notice of absence. Of course, this is not a good thing. The last time I chatted with Jing Guan, as well as on the phone with Tomcat, we talked about this point. I'm a writer who's publicly acknowledged to have a terrible character, but now I'm actually nagging someone about the unfairness of Unix and the importance of stable updates. Even I can't imagine it. If you want to say that I'm a good-for-nothing big shot, that I wasn't a big shot when I was an ambitious person? That God wasn't a big shot? That Ergu and Toad weren't big shots? To be honest, Xueqi is my least big shot work. Compared to the previous scams, I gave fewer promises and more notifications. I also had the most chapters. I also had the most interactions with readers. The number of times I clenched my teeth and persevered was undoubtedly the most. Therefore, if there are old readers who want to show off their superiority and tell you about the past, don't be in a hurry to scold them for being a brainless fan.
You have to know that these brothers who appear to be impervious to fire and water have already been shot in the heart.
They are just clenching their teeth and forcing a smile. Furthermore, there are many new people who have fallen into my trap. Sooner or later, they will unfortunately become one of them. Who knows what will happen in the future? Although I am an author, I am also a reader. The age of a web novel reader is almost twice that of an author. Therefore, I have never cared about pirated posts. This is because I read pirated posts myself. I don't have the right to give advice. At most, I use my identity as a second-rate, third-rate, or fourth-rate author to recommend works that I really like as a way to make up for it. If I have to say that I'm a big shot, it would be the overly impetuous readers. As always, I don't like them. It was the same when I was writing scams. Back then, I would often argue with readers in the comments section. I wouldn't stop even if I were to argue with them. However, I don't have the willpower and mentality anymore. Firstly, I feel that it is useless. No one can convince the other. Secondly, authors still rely on their works to prove themselves. Of course, this impetuousness isn't the scolding when the chapters are interrupted. It is the skimming through the contents of the chapters. There are many long-winded chapters in Snow. Even I find it annoying. Actually, they are all explaining things that have been hinted at. When you fill in the gaps, some people don't even realize it and only feel confused. The author can only helplessly do something superfluous, even sacrificing part of their reading habits. Previously, when they said that they are impatient to change their reading habits, they are referring to those who are obsessed with the content of the book. I can understand this small group of people, but I don't agree with them. In Snow, there are actually many climaxes of varying sizes. As for the content that I like, it has always been hidden. Every time someone mentions it, it will be like scratching an itch.
For example, the battle between Luo Yang and Heaven and Earth.
What I thought was the climax wasn't Luo Yang's dominance, but Song Yanqing's pair of cloth shoes.
She was the old woman who had been waiting for her husband to return home.
I used to say that an author's greatest responsibility is to write seriously. Now, I should change it to writing seriously and steadily. I can temporarily not do well, but after all, I have to persevere and work hard on this path. Chapter 869. Time to write. In the evening, he wrote about a plot that he had been longing for a long time. He had thought about it since the old headmaster carried Hong Shixiang to Wudong on a snowy night. Li Yufu brought back a child who had just enlightened his orifices. This was like a circle. Number 94 Wudong Peach Charm. There were many hills in Jiangnan. There were different sounds 10 miles away and different customs 100 miles away. There were less than 100 families in Yu Village. The simple yellow mud houses were built on the mountainside.
There was a mountain behind them and a mountain in front of them.
The river flowed at the foot of the mountain. Yu Village was sandwiched between two villages. Yu Village had never produced any talents. They didn't even have a scholar, let alone a powerful official.
They had always been bullied by the other two villages. Every summer they would be bullied. They only dared to secretly dig up the small dam used by the neighboring villages to cut off the water and pour it into their own fields. There was a local custom of dancing with a bamboo horse. Yu village was so shabby that those who rode bamboo horses to beg for money were not willing to enter the village. Every time, the children in the village could only follow behind and risk being bullied to go to the neighboring villages to watch the fun. There were very few people in Yu village who didn't have the surname Yu. This was because if a man wanted to marry a wife, he could only look for a wife in his own village. It was called keeping the goodies within the family, unlike the two neighboring villages, where every year, there would be wives from other villages marrying into the village. The parents of the mentally retarded Xianxia were both surnamed Yu. The in-laws lived at the head of the village and the end of the village. They ate and walked, but they didn't even finish half a bowl of rice before they reached the door. Xianxia looked delicate. In the local dialect, he drank too much bewitching soup when he was reincarnated and couldn't be enlightened in this life. His parents took him dozens of miles away to a famous witch to summon his soul, but they couldn't get his soul back from the king of hell. However, which village didn't have one or two fools? The child's parents had already accepted their fate. In the future, they would spend more money and casually find a woman to marry. Even if they didn't, they would still be able to continue the family line. However, the people of the Yu family village had been clicking their tongues in amazement during this period of time. They didn't know why Xianxia had suddenly become enlightened. In the past, he only knew how to smile and drool non-stop when he met people. Now, he was actually clean and even knew to greet the elders of the village based on his seniority. Only the Song village next door, which was relatively wealthy, had a thatched cottage and a village school. It did not belong to the Song village's ancestral school, so it was willing to accept the children of other surnames. Every day when he returned to the village, he would scribble scribbles on the ground. Only later did the villagers realize that the scribbles were indeed words from books. That private tutor, who may or may not have achieved scholarly honors, settled down in the village 20 years ago and never left. The amount of lessons he taught was only 300,000. The 3 basic axes of enlightenment. It was not rare, and he had never said anything shocking. He was probably just a rotten scholar with a rough understanding of literature. Furthermore, his accent was thick, making it difficult for the children entering the village to get used to it. For some unknown reason, the 60-year-old private tutor had taken a liking to Xianxia. Not only did he purposely place a small wooden stool outside the window, in his spare time, he also intentionally or unintentionally taught the child the etiquette of entering a Confucian school. Since he did not ask Yu Fu's parents for a monetary gift, he also did not have the child kowtow to enter the school. At the entrance of Song village, there was an old locust tree with an empty belly. The old locust tree had been leaning against a rock and water for who knows how many hundreds of years. In any case, the Song family's genealogy could be traced back 400 years. The Song family's ancestor was still not as old as the locust tree. A young Taoist carrying a peachwood sword and a cotton bag walked on the crooked muddy road. He stood under the old locust tree and looked out. Suddenly, he saw the 3 villages in a row. In the winter, the stream was sluggish. Many things were revealed. A Taoist with an elegant temperament rarely seen in the countryside walked along the small path created by people all year round and squatted by the stream. He scooped up a handful of cool stream water and gently washed his face. He heard the sound of chickens and dogs barking. With a face full of smiles, he stood up. A few village children of different ages squatted on the bank. The braver ones asked him if he was an immortal who could catch demons and drive away ghosts. The Taoist in plain robes smiled warmly and shook his head. The disappointed children immediately scattered like birds and beasts. The Taoist walked into the village. In front of the house, there were many old people carrying bamboo baskets embedded with iron sheets and charcoal for heating. They lazily sat on tree stumps and basked in the sun. When they met a rare Taoist, there was some simple curiosity and respect in their eyes. They did not know how to greet him and were afraid of offending him, so they just greeted him with a smile. The young Taoist with clear eyes was born with a kind face and did not deliberately return the greeting. He walked and stopped in the village and followed the sound of reading until he reached the front of the village school. He saw Yu Fu sitting on a small bench under the window and shaking his head. His back was small and thin, and he seemed to have forgotten himself. The young Taoist stopped and looked away. He quietly shook his clothes and horsetail whisk. Only then did he walk forward and stand beside Yu Fu to listen to the sounds together.
After the old pedant set the reading time, he did not sit upright. Instead, he stood by the window on the other side of Yu Fu, one hand behind his back and the other holding a book. He nodded from time to time. When the children finished reciting the book, the old pedant was about to speak when he inadvertently saw the Taoist outside the window. He was surprised and quickly walked out of the simple and crude hut. The young Taoist bowed and said, "I am Li Yufu. I used to cultivate on Mount Wudong." The old pedant who received the greeting was flattered and said, "So it is the Taoist master who cultivated on Mount Wudong. I am Su Liang. I am ashamed to be a teacher. If there is anything wrong with my teaching, I hope Taoist master will not be stingy with your advice." The young Taoist shook his head and said with a smile, "Mr. Su is too serious. I have traveled around this time. Before I return to the mountain, I will be bold enough to look for an opportunity. In the future, there may be many disturbances." Su Liang, who had always been rigid and strict in front of children, laughed and said, "Taoist master is too polite, too polite." Nowadays, there was almost no limit to the venerated Taoist master Huang in the imperial court. As long as it was not a wandering Taoist who wore a Taoist robe and deliberately cheated the money of foolish people, the imperial court was very respectful to the recorded Taoist masters. There were many Taoist temples in the world, and the two celestial mountains of Mount Longhu and Mount Wudong were the leaders. In the eyes of the villagers, as long as it was a Taoist master who came out of these two blessed places, regardless of age, he was a Taoist master. If this Taoist master who called himself Li Yufu was not too young, Su Liang, who did have some knowledge in his stomach, would have respectfully called him an immortal. As for the battle of the ancestral court and the ascension of the immortals, these villages did not care. Even if they heard about it, they could only be speechless. After the delicate Yu Fu stood up from the bench, he did not leave. He listened quietly at the side. Su Liang glanced at the child, who he thought had spiritual qi, and said with a half-genuine half-fake smile, "Since Taoist master has come to look for an opportunity, take a look at this child. His surname is Yu and his name is Fu. His surname and name are ordinary, but when they are stacked together, they are not vulgar. Yu Fu, the accumulation of good fortune for the rest of one's life. What a good name. When I was young, I also learned some facial features. Although I don't think he is rich, I feel happy from the bottom of my heart. Taoist Master Li, why don't you open your third eye?" Li Yufu squatted down and stared at Yu Fu, who was not afraid to look at him, and said softly, "I don't dare to talk nonsense." The old man, who did not hear the praise, was a little regretful. However, after experiencing the wind and rain, he knew that many blessings could not be forced. Otherwise, he would not be willing to be a poor teacher in this village. Chapter 870. Then, a Taoist priest named Li inexplicably lived in the Yu family village. He didn't stay with the villagers. There were many green bamboos on the mountain, so he spent half a year building a bamboo house. When he was free, he would weave bamboo baskets and distribute them to the villagers. If a villager gave him rice, wine, or food, he would return a large basket of winter bamboo shoots. He also patiently helped many children chop bamboo to make flutes and taught them how to play them. The villagers were willing to ask him for help when they had some happy events. If someone got into a small disaster or a small illness, the young Taoist priest would take the initiative to go deep into the mountains to pick herbs. He even acted like a doctor, helping people look, listen, ask questions, and feel the pulse, silently dredging the meridians. Over time, not only the nearby villages, but also the people within 100 miles knew that the Yu family village's ancestral grave was emitting green smoke. It was actually able to let a young immortal stay in the back mountain to cultivate. When Su Liang was free, he would go to the bamboo house to ask Zhenren Li for advice on cultivation. Yu Fu often went there as well. In the sound of firecrackers, he bid farewell to the old year and exchanged the new peach for the old talisman. Yu Fu's parents, who had always been unable to raise their heads in the village, felt very proud because the Spring Festival couplet hanging on Zhenren Li's bamboo door was written by their son. Since Zhenren Li came and became close to Yu Fu's parents' voices in the village became louder. Every time a few good-looking girls in the village happened to meet the young Taoist priest on the bluestone path in the village, they would smile and walk slowly with their heads down shyly. When they brushed past each other, they would quietly look back. Some of the women who were already married would definitely not be so reserved. When they were washing clothes with the elegant young man by the stream, they spoke without restraint. Every time they saw the young Taoist priest in a Taoist robe blushing, The women would look at each other and laugh, secretly thinking that he was really a thin-skinned handsome guy. If he returned to the secular world in the future, any woman who could marry him would be a great blessing. In the blink of an eye, the winter snow melted, and suddenly the spring flowers bloomed. The willows sprouted tender yellow, and the green carp came with the sound of the stream. Every morning, when the sun rose from the east and climbed up the mountain, the villagers who got up early to farm could see a pleasing scene. Under the leadership of Zhenren Li, a group of children practiced boxing together in front of the bamboo building. Although it was called boxing, it was actually just drawing circles there, but it looked really good from a distance. Day after day, spring went and summer came. Except for his elegant appearance, Zhenren Li was no different from a villager in other aspects. He gave all the money he got from picking herbs and selling them to a few old widows and widows in the village. As long as there was a busy farm work in the village, he would definitely show up if the children ran a few steps to inform him. Previously, after the Guyu reign, he was transplanting rice seedlings. Almost every day, he could be seen bending over in different fields. Unexpectedly, he was self-taught and skilled in transplanting rice seedlings. Probably influenced by him, the 3 villages that used to fight for water in the past were much more amiable now. They were more considerate and less bullied others. After the private teacher Su Liang got drunk, he always nagged the elders of the village not to delay Zhenren Li's cultivation because of the farm work. At first, the villagers were a little nervous, but later, when they saw that Zhenren Li was still the same Zhenren Li who would grant any request, they were relieved. During this period, someone said that he saw a tiger go down the mountain with his own eyes. When Zhenren Li stood there, the king of the mountain obediently turned around and ran back to the deep mountains and forests. The ignorant villagers increasingly felt that if there were really immortals in the world, they would be nothing more than this. At dusk between summer and autumn, the summer heat on the mountain faded. Yu Fu and the private teacher Su Liang were sitting in front of the bamboo building to enjoy the shade. Li Yufu was sitting on a small stool, weaving a bamboo basket with her fingers. The child, who was already very familiar with Zhenren Li, squatted next to her and asked, "Is Mount Wudong very high?" Li Yufu stopped weaving the basket and said softly, "When I was young, I had to walk for a long time. Maybe I thought it was high. When I grew up, I didn't think it was high." The child smiled and asked, "Does it snow on Mount Wudong?" Li Yufu raised her head and looked at the mountain opposite. She pursed her lips, then nodded and said with a smile, "Of course. When my master's master carried my Xueqi up the mountain, it snowed heavily. I remember Xueqi told me that he was woken up the next day. Standing on the little lotus peak, he looked like a big steamed bun, which made people drool." Yufu asked again, "Can I go to Wudong to have a look?" Li Yufu did not speak this time, but just smiled. Su Liang was not a pedantic fool. He looked kindly at Yufu and touched his head. Then he turned to look at Li Yufu of Wudong and said softly, "Since it's fate, why don't you bring him to Taoism? This is a great thing for Yufu and his family." Li Yufu said with a firm look, "We cultivate to achieve immortality. We don't violate human relations and don't violate reason. As long as the parents are here, there must be a way to travel." The old man sighed and said, "Since Zhenren said that there must be a way to travel, it means that it's not impossible to travel far. As long as the child's parents are settled down and there are no worries, he has done his filial duty." Li Yufu smiled warmly and said, "There's no harm in waiting." Su Liang hesitated for a moment and asked in a deep voice, "Zhenren Li, there's something I don't know if I should ask." Li Yufu nodded and said, "Please go ahead." Su Liang gritted his teeth and said, "I took the opportunity to go to the market at the end of the year and asked about the situation of Wudong Mountain in the city. I heard that the current leader's surname is Li. Living here, he could see the mountain as soon as he opened the door." Li Yufu said calmly, "It's me." Su Liang suddenly stood up as if he had been struck by lightning. His lips trembled and he was at a loss. Li Yufu smiled and put down the half-woven basket. He stood up and pulled the old tutor back to the bamboo chair, then continued to work. Su Liang muttered to himself as if he had lost his mind, "How can there be an immortal like you?" Another year passed, and Li Yufu came to Yufu's house to give him a bunch of spring festival couplets. Yufu's father shamelessly asked Zhenren Li for several spring festival couplets. He didn't leave out any of the couplets from his father-in-law and several distant relatives. When Zhenren Li was about to turn and leave, Yufu's father blushed and felt uneasy. He wanted to say something but hesitated. His wife pulled his cuff several times, but the man didn't have the courage to speak. The man also knew that it was not a good idea to be so stiff. He had heard that a storyteller once said that killing someone was just a matter of nodding. The man scratched his head and took a bag from his wife. He grinned and said honestly, "Zhenren Li, my wife is pregnant again. Moreover, the world is peaceful now. People in the mountains are not afraid of having more children and can afford to raise them. I was wondering if I could ask Zhenren to accept Yu Fu as your disciple. If this boy becomes successful, our Yu family will also be blessed. Zhenren Li, we don't have much money at home, so we just saved up this money. I know you don't want this, but if you can accept Yu Fu, even if we owe him money, we will definitely pay him back in the future." Li Yufu pushed back the bag of money, then took Yu Fu's hand and bowed deeply to the couple. The man, who rarely called children by their real names, was afraid that Zhenren Li would go back on his word, so he hurriedly shouted, "Yu Fu, kowtow to master." Li Yufu let go of Yu Fu's hand and took 3 steps back, folding his hands on his lower abdomen. Yu Fu knelt down and kowtowed 3 times heavily. When Yu Fu kowtowed for the first time, Li Yufu had already raised his arm and covered his eyes with his sleeve, but he still couldn't hide the tears on his face. That year, it snowed heavily in Wudong. Li Yufu, the leader, brought back a disciple named Yu Fu. When the young leader went up the mountain with the child on his back, the drowsy child held a string of bright red candied haws in his hand. After reaching the top of Wudong, the young Taoist with his disciple on his back looked into the distance and choked with sobs. "Little Shu, we're back." Chapter 871. After Lin Hongyuan showed off his identity as the Dragon Palace, he was immediately invited to an elegant cabin on the 2nd floor. Zhao Zhu's eyes lit up when he entered the cabin. There was a woman sitting on a large green banana leaf, holding a small Yanzhu Kong Ho in her arms. Her left hand held the Kong Ho while her right hand pulled the strings. Her eyes were moist. The woman's appearance was not extraordinary, but she was slender and delicate, causing people to feel pity for her. The Kong Ho originated in the western regions, flourished in the southern Tang dynasty, and stopped in Liang. Because a certain noblewoman in the imperial court did not want the sound of the Kong Ho to spread throughout the court, and the famous scholars and Confucian scholars added fuel to the fire by slandering the Kong Ho's decadent sound. Thus, it was gradually overshadowed by the similar Guzheng. The wife of Yi Baikue, the head of the famous generals of the spring and autumn period, was famous for playing the Kong Ho. Zhao Zhu quickly approached the woman on the banana leaf and squatted down. He waved his hand at the thin woman, indicating for her to play the strings. He closed his eyes and listened. Under the woman's fingers, the music lingered and Zhao Zhu listened attentively. Su Fengnian looked at this guy with new eyes. Lin Hongyuan dismissed the maidservants and personally poured tea. He explained in a low voice. "His Highness is proficient in music. He is an expert in the guqin, zheng, flute, drum, Kong Ho, and so on." There was an untimely knock on the door outside the cabin. Lin Hongyuan got up and opened the door. The second-class steward of the Quick Snow Mountain Villa suppressed his excitement and tried to speak in a calm tone. Reporting to the Dragon Palace Ferry, "We just received news that the Mount Hui Mountain Master, Shenyuan Qingfeng, has put up a life-and-death contract on the main arena. Whoever can withstand 10 moves from her can choose any 3 secret manuals of Mount Hui. Whoever can defeat her will be the master of Mount Hui." The Mount Hui Mountain Master also threatened that if no one accepted the challenge or knocked her out of the arena, then the title of Wulin Alliance would fall into the hands of the Shenyuan family. But today, as long as someone enters the arena, she will not show any mercy. At this moment, everyone is excited and waiting for our villa master to start the competition. Lin Hongyuan nodded. The steward lowered his head and left in a hurry. He thought that the woman in purple was really a noble of the villa. She wanted to fight against Zhang Hu alone. No matter who won or lost in the end, it would be a big gimmick. Anyway, it would be beneficial to the Snow Villa. More than 20 large ships gradually dropped their anchors and stopped, surrounding a large square platform on the lake. Colorful flags fluttered in the wind. Among the huge ships, there were more than 100 somewhat shabby little black boats. There were all kinds of people, and the atmosphere was vigorous. The Wulin world was full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers, and the Jianghu was surging with great momentum. Su Fengnian, Zhao Zhu, and Lin Hongyuan all walked to the bow of the ship on the 2nd floor. Compared to the crowded 1st floor, the 2nd floor was much more empty. A few Jianghu heroes who were particular about putting on airs moved a large number of people to bring chairs over. They sized up Su Fengnian and the other two. However, among the three of them, apart from Lin Hongyuan, who was holding the green go, who could be considered to have a bit of style, the other two did not seem to have any weight, so they did not pay much attention to them. Zhao Zhu touched the bridge of his nose, which was somewhat frozen red, and said in a low voice, "Originally, I thought that if that little beauty holding the Kongho was an assassin, that would be good. In this trip to Jianghu, other than being a coolie for young Palace Master Lin, who doesn't even earn half a copper coin, I haven't seen any big scenes. Looking at those few hair-raising battles of yours, it's really infuriating." On the arena, the woman in purple stood in the center with an overbearing aura. She really did have the meaning of a peerless talent of her generation. In the future, who knew how many Jianghu heroes would find it difficult to let go of this scene? Su Fengnian retracted his gaze and sneered, "You built so many temples in Nanjiang, were they all just to fool people?" Zhao Zhu laughed foolishly and said, "A real man doesn't boast about his past glory. This year, I didn't cause much trouble. Mr. Nayland said it well, to be kind to others, one must be kind to others." Su Fengnian dismissed it with a laugh. Zhao Zhu suddenly gave Su Fengnian a bear hug and patted Su Fengnian's back with all his strength. "Brother, big brother will go back first. Seeing you is enough. If I don't hurry back, Mr. Nayland will lecture me again. If he is determined not to let you go, he can talk for hours without drinking a sip of tea. I am not afraid of the heavens or the earth, but I am afraid of his foot-binding preaching." Su Fengnian was stunned for a moment and asked, "You didn't see how Mount Hui Mountain's mountain chieftain went on a killing spree?" Zhao Zhu let go and shook his head. So what if he became a Wulin Alliance leader? So what if he became the world's #1? It's meaningless. Su Fengnian sent Zhao Zhu and Lin Hongyuan to the stern of the first floor. The colorful boat was tied to the small boat with a black awning. Before Zhao Zhu left, he took out a copper coin from his money pouch and stuffed it into Su Fengnian's hand. He smiled brightly and said, "I, Zhao Zhu, can be considered a half-baked noble descendant of the heavens. In this lifetime, I have only known you as my friend. Whether or not you remember our old friendship, I, Zhao Zhu, will not forget. No matter how good or bad this world is in the future, as long as you are willing to come to my side, as long as I, Zhao Zhu, have food to eat, you won't starve, Su Fengnian. Other than not being able to send you your wife and son, everything else is fine." Su Fengnian held the copper coin and didn't say anything. Lin Hongyuan said softly to Su Fengnian apologetically, "His Royal Highness, I'm afraid that I will have to think of a way to send the mysterious steel rubbing finger to Bailiang later. I hope you will forgive me." Chapter 872. Su Fengnian smiled and nodded. He did not dislike this woman who was good at scheming. Because of Zhao Zhu, he did not mind giving her a way out. Of the vassals of the dynasty, the king of Jiaodong, Zhao Sui, was in charge of the two Liao provinces, but it was too close to Graydon City and could not be said to be far away from the emperor. In reality, only Su Shao and Zhao Bing, the king of Yanqi, were true to their name. If Zhao Zhu was not the eldest son of Zhao Bing, these words with hidden meaning would be suspected of not knowing the immensity of heaven and earth. Zhao Zhu had grown his wings much earlier than Su Fengnian. As long as he made military contributions in the rise and fall of West Chu, it would be justified for the Liang dynasty to have a third hereditary emperor. Su Fengnian waited for Zhao Zhu to jump onto the small boat. He grabbed the bamboo pole and said with a smile, "Little beggar, if the ritual collapses again, come to Bailiang, I guarantee you will not be an old beggar." Zhao Zhu said with a bitter face, "Should I say thank you for your auspicious words or curse you for your inauspicious mouth?" Su Fengnian laughed and waved his hand. "Go back to your Nanjiang." Zhao Zhu patted his chest with a fist and leisurely rowed the boat away. After the boat sailed out of the lake, Lin Hongyuan asked carefully, "Your Highness, how about this servant paddle the boat?" Zhao Zhu threw the bamboo pole to Lin Hongyuan and stood proudly with his arms around his chest. Lin Hongyuan dared to play tricks with Su Fengnian, but did not have the guts to play tricks with Shitzi Zhao Zhu, who had made great military contributions. Nanjiang was already in place. In reality, many people knew this, but they did not dare to think deeply and did not dare to say it out loud. Mr. Nayland was just waiting for the words, "right time." Zhao Zhu said softly, "If I become the emperor, I will not believe in ghosts and gods but in people's hearts." Lin Hongyuan almost could not hold the pole. Zhao Zhu said with a smile, "What are you afraid of?"
Lin Hongyuan said with a pale face. This servant did not hear anything. Zhao Zhu muttered to himself, if I ask Su Fengnian to use the 300,000 iron cavalry of northern Liang to exchange for a position that is second only to one person and above 10,000 people, as well as a position that will last for generations, would he trade? Lin Hongyuan was silent. He would rather die than say anything. In the outer corridor of the colorful boat, Huang Liang, who used to go wherever there was a lively scene, was still squatting at the foot of the outer corridor wall in a daze, even though the purple-clothed man had already appeared on the arena. Previously, he was riding Feng Maolin's beloved son, so his knees were covered with dust. At that time, some Jianghu people on the boat rolled their eyes, but Huang Liang did not care. As long as he boarded Feng Maolin's big ship, although distant water could not quench the present thirst, it meant that he could take advantage of the situation to hook up with the famous couple in Huai River Jianghu. Their young daughter, when Huang Liang was riding Feng Maolin's horse, he had also flattered her many times. The little girl did not show him a good face and always ignored him. But Huang Liang did not think it was shameful. Since he was in Jianghu, he could do whatever he wanted. As long as he made a name for himself, who would care if he was a dog when he was down? Besides, didn't dogs also know how to dog paddle? But what made Huang Liang's heart sink was that Feng Maolin and his wife, who were unattainable in his eyes, were beaten by the friend surnamed Su and could not fight back. Huang Liang had always regarded the guy, whom he met by chance, as a fool with a lot of money. He was shocked that he knew Su Zhan and Zhou Qinhu, and wished that he could eat a few caddies of beef and drink a few caddies of good wine to calm himself down. But he did not have the money to buy any wine. When Feng Maolin and his men were forced to swallow the bitter pill, Huang Liang knew that all his efforts were in vain. Su Xiaoshou would no longer allow him to swindle food and drink as he used to, and Feng Maolin might even vent his anger on him, a little pawn who could be easily bullied. Some people in Jianghu would eventually become successful, but most people would spend their whole lives in Jianghu. Huang Liang was not afraid of suffering, but he was afraid that he would not see a chance to become a decent man. How great was the ability of a hero to be worthy of the word hero? What kind of divine ability did an immortal have to be called an immortal? Sometimes, Huang Liang, who had always been seeking personal gain, would wonder if he had never entered Jianghu. Huang Liang, who was stunned, leaned against the wooden wall and finally came to his senses. He rubbed his cheeks and suddenly found that the light was a little dim. When he looked up, he was startled and fell to the ground. Su Zhan, who was wearing a funny red fox fur hat, was leaning against the wall with his feet tied in knots and his hands in his sleeves. Huang Liang, do you still remember how we met? Su Fengnian asked calmly. Huang Liang thought that this man was going to settle accounts with him and beat him when he was down. He smiled bitterly and said, at that time, I was as blind as a bat and asked for wine from young master. Su Fengnian shook his head. At that time, a child beggar sneaked into the restaurant and tried to beg for some food, but he was caught by a sharp-eyed waiter. One of the diners saw that the beggar's hands were full of frostbite and blood, so he poured half a bowl of wine into the beggar's hands. Among the people who were drinking on the first floor, you were the only one who hesitated for a long time. Finally, you couldn't stand it anymore, so you stood up for him and said something fair. Only then did the beggar stop being treated as entertainment. At that time, I thought of a friend who had left Jianghu. That was why I asked you to drink. Of course, you did not hesitate and ate and drank with a clear conscience all the way. Huang Liang chuckled. Su Fengnian saw a mighty warship approaching abruptly and saw an old man standing at the bow. He was slightly absent-minded. He pressed down on his fox fur hat and turned to Huang Liang. When Mount Hui's Shenyuan Qingfeng wins the arena and becomes the Wulin Alliance Master, do you dare to say a few words to her? Huang Liang was stunned. He smiled awkwardly and said, that depends on what you want to say. Su Fengnian walked to the railing and said, you can say that a man named Su Fengnian asked you to go to Mount Hui to make a living. Huang Liang watched as the man who did not call himself Su Qi jumped over the railing and floated toward another huge warship that looked particularly majestic. Su Fengnian? Who was that? Huang Liang was confused, but he felt that he should try his luck. At worst, he would be sent flying by a slap from the Mount Hui's mountain lord. Most likely he would not die. Many years later, an old man who had Mount Hui as his backer but still failed to make a name for himself would still tell his grandson before his death that his grandfather used to roam Jianghu with that man. Chapter 873. There was no armor on the Yellow Dragon battleship. In addition to a slightly hunched old man, There was only a majestic man with a pair of silkworm eyebrows beside him. He always looked like a tiger taking a nap. A little distance behind him stood a middle-aged man with a spear. Su Fengnian gently floated behind. He exchanged a glance with the old man and then greeted Yuan Zuozong. He did not forget to nod to the retainer named Lu Yanbing in the distance. As Wang Xiu's junior fellow apprentice, this person had always lived in the shadow of Immortal of Spear. He was not famous and had never done anything shocking. Therefore, Lu Yanbing's cultivation was unfathomable. Su Xiao, who had left Bailiang with a simple entourage, took Su Fengnian to the railing and said with a smile, "I remember the last time I was at the Spring God Lake, I fought with Wang Mingyang of Xiangfan City. This time I took the opportunity to take a look. The lake is still the same lake, but it is much livelier and livelier than before when there were corpses and starving people everywhere." Along the way, she witnessed everything with her own eyes. Only then did she realize that Zhao Hang and Zhao Sun, this pair of father and son, were truly proficient in governing the various administrative matters within their jurisdiction. Just by casually drinking tea in the city, one could hear the commoners praising Prince Jingon. I have always thought that if an official in the imperial court was criticized and impeached by the imperial censor, he might not be a corrupt official. But if the people in the territory said he was good, most of them were really good. At the mention of the young vassal king that he had kicked into the spring lake, Su Fengnian sneered. Luckily, he had a first-rate strategist by his side. Otherwise, Zhao Sun would have long been eaten up by the Green Party. The Green Party, which relied on unity to achieve success, was torn apart by Zhang Julu in just a few moves. They were completely unable to compete with the Zhang Party and the Gu Party. However, to deal with Zhao Sun, whose prestige was not enough to suppress Qing Zhou, wasn't it easy? Liang's surname is Zhao, but whether Xiangfan City and Qingzhou's surname is Zhao, who cares? It was someone who helped him sort out the situation and build relationships. He told those old foxes about the benefits. He threw away the bait of marrying a concubine and purposely helped the son of a Green Party boss get a real power position in Taiyan City. Afterwards, he used other people to tell the truth. Zhao Sun did not have these real bait and favors. He would only be reduced to the same conduct as the Duke of Huainan. Su Xiao grabbed the railing with both hands and laughed. It was that blind Lu Su who gambled with you at Yongzi Alley. The 2 strategies and 14 strategies were written by him. I have seen it. Even a brute like me can understand it. Not simple. Zhao Heng, that woman, has been making mistakes all her life. Only this marriage was done beautifully. In Ishan's words, there was no smoke and fire. When the conditions are right, success will come naturally. That is why people cannot be too smooth. When things are too smooth, they can only rely on themselves. They still want to save face and are not willing to do desperate actions. Su Fengnian asked, "Why did you think of leaving Bailiang?" Yuan Ergu and Lu Qiuer. These newcomers are replacing old generals. Bailiang is in turmoil in everyone's eyes. Plus, with the east wind that the Bailiang cavalry broke through the border last time, Dong Zhuo and Hong Jingyan in Beimang are not as restrained as before. Aren't you afraid that Beimang will retaliate and catch us off guard? What if there is someone in Bailiang? Chapter 874. Su Fengnian stopped here. Su Xiao waved his hand and said with a smile, "Support from both inside and outside?" Daddy was more than happy for those rotten sores and pus to leak out on their own. It was disgusting to always hide them. Some people, after all, had been through life and death for half of their lives. Father could only turn a blind eye to them. In the early years, he had promised them that as long as they did not die on the battlefield, he would take all the women, money and official hats. Father owed the dead a lot in this life, but for those who were alive, he felt that he did not owe them much. Take Zhong Honggu for example. The first time his father met him, he was only a sergeant. At that time, his father jokingly asked him how high he wanted to be in the future. Zhong Honggu said that he would be satisfied if he could be a lieutenant with 700 to 800 strong brothers under his command. If he could kill anyone he didn't like, his life would be worth it. There was also Yan Wenluan, an interesting young man when he was young. He always said to me that he wanted to be a horse dealer in the future. That way, even if he died, he could die on the back of a horse. If he was a peace official who did not have to worry about food and clothing, he said he would not be willing to ride a horse in his old age. He was afraid he would die on a woman's belly. Sometimes, Father looked at those old people who were gradually getting fat and suddenly felt that he did not recognize any of them.
Back then, there were brothers who dared to scold father for being disappointing, saying that if father was a general, he would be better than Su Xiao. There were old brothers who were willing to go crazy in the middle of the night, carrying a jar of wine and running to father's tent to compete in drinking and drinking. There were old brothers who smiled and threatened father that if they did not set a marriage, they would not be brothers. At that time, Li Yishan and Zhao Chongling were still there. Zhong Honggu, Yan Wenwan, and a large group of people were not old. Chen Zhibao, Yuan Zuozong, and the other children did not need to be said. At that time, father liked to fight the most. He was never afraid of people dying. Father was not afraid. Who dared to be afraid? If you did not have the guts, then scram back to your wife to warm the bed. So as long as there was a battle to fight, they would go crazy. If there was no battle, they would shamelessly ask those officials for a battle. You want money? Father is not good at that. I will give you as much as I have. You think it is not enough? Then let's put it on credit first. Once I win the war, you can just let your men take the chests away with carriages. Military merits? That's fine, as long as you give me some leftovers. Don't treat the brothers who risk their lives too badly. As long as your descendants come to the battlefield, it'll be fine even if they're tens of thousands of miles away from the battlefield. After the war, you'll still give them a lot of military merits for free. This way, who wouldn't be willing to do business with father? Only a fool wouldn't do it. Then, the imperial court began to know that there was a young barbarian surnamed Su who came from a poor background in Liaodong. After he made a name for himself, he was not greedy for money or achievements. He just wanted to die on the battlefield. Thus, in the end, the court officials who had a good relationship with father were very willing to give the troops weapons, hoping that father's military achievements would allow them to speak loudly in the court. The enemies who did not have a good relationship with father were even more willing to say, "You, Su Xiao, are tired of living? Then you can go gnaw on the hardest bones and fight the hardest battles to the death." Afterwards, father fought and fought his way south. Those lofty pillars of the imperial court, the noble clans and aristocratic families who had always looked down on father, were finally willing to open their eyes and take a look. Only then were they somewhat afraid. Unknowingly, how did that barbarian Su's troops become so majestic? Su Xiao grinned, extending a hand. 50,000 cavalry. Father used 50,000 cavalry to destroy northern Han. That year, the young emperor of northern Han clamored with your father, saying that the one surnamed Su was not worthy of your mother, Wu Su. He also said that your mother was blind and was not worthy of practicing the sword. Father did not argue with him. In the end, father led 600 elite cavalry, directly charging through the gates of the imperial palace and into the throne room. That fellow was paralyzed on the dragon throne, so frightened that he wet his pants. Su Fengnian's eyes were warm as he smiled. In reality, he had long since memorized this story by heart. He had heard it so many times that he was sick of it. However, he was different from the impatience that he displayed on his face in the past. Now, as long as Su Xiao was willing to speak, he was willing to listen. Su Xiao suddenly smiled awkwardly. Clearly, he was thirsty. Waving his hand at Yuan Zuozong, who was deliberately standing far away, he said, "Go get 2 jugs of white wine. There is no need to warm it. The hotter it is, the better." Yuan Zuozong quickly returned with 2 jugs of wine, one for Su Xiao and one for Su Fengnian. After a pause, Su Xiao no longer spoke of his past. Softly he said, "Han Xianxia is dead. Lu Hao is also dead. The only ones left are Benqi and Zhao Huangchao. What father could not do, son has done. Father is even happier." This time, father left Bailiang not only to give Yan Wenwan and the others one last chance, but also to walk the same path as you. On the way, I went to the Jin family's mansion. I did not want to make things difficult for them. However, I heard that the old man of Jin Lanting, Jin Right Chancellor, was scared to death on the same day after knowing that father did not enter. Su Fengnian said helplessly, "You did not let them have a good new year." Su Xiao dismissed it with a smile. He looked towards the northwest and slowly said, "Father has been thinking about one thing for the past 2 years. If Northern Mang is truly determined to go south regardless of the overall situation, then in the end, how much of the family's wealth will I hand over to you?" Father had fought so many battles in his life. There were wins and losses, but he rarely won. But when he lost, it was really tragic. There were 2 times when he was almost completely wiped out. It was so tragic that no one thought that father could make a comeback. After losing the battle, I saw those young faces that were blackened by gunpowder. When they saw father, they could still smile. They did not feel that they followed the wrong person. Father was aggrieved. At that time, I swore that even if father was lucky enough to become a high-ranking official and have a son, I must let this kid go to the battlefield in the future. It was only in this way that father felt that he had not let down those soldiers and felt a bit better. But when father really did have a son, it was like when the Zhao family wanted to invite you to the capital to be their son-in-law. In truth, father had thought of agreeing. At that time, father thought that if he had to feel guilty, he should feel guilty toward father alone. When father went to the underworld, father would apologize to old brothers. In his heart, father still selfishly hoped that his son would not suffer such a fate. Then, father took some wine to Tide Listening Pavilion to drink with Ishan. Did you know? Ishan directly threw the wine out of the room. It was only later when he heard that you had run off to roam the Jianghu that I went to drink with him to drown my sorrows that Ishan finally smiled. He drank so much that father could not stop him. So in the past few years, after many old generals took root in Bailiang, many fathers were heroes and their sons were cowards. When their sons caused many disasters, they had to clean up their messes. Some of them left some face and directly came to Mount Qingliang to beg for mercy. Some of them thought that I couldn't see and sneakily did even more wrong things. They killed people to silence them and eliminate them by the roots. Their methods were not inferior to those of the Spring and Autumn War. Some of them were even more direct. They thought that since father had risked his life to build his family business with Su Xiao, it was no big deal for his own son to kill a few people and bully a few women. Murder and arson became a matter of course. Why didn't they think about why they were willing to put their lives on the line to fight Su Xiao back then? Why did they not hesitate to kill officials? Su Xiao fiercely gulped down a mouthful of wine. He asked with a smile, "Father originally wanted Ishan to do some things, but Ishan said that you would not let him do it no matter what. What were your thoughts?" Su Fengnian calmly said, "You have a notorious reputation in this lifetime. Do you think you haven't been cursed enough? Only among the old generals and soldiers of Bailiang do you still have a good reputation. You're not afraid of being scolded for not cherishing old feelings, but I am." Before those new emperors ascended the throne, the previous emperors would quickly help remove the imperial schemes of those old meritorious men. Don't use them on Bailiang. If it were me, you would more or less be at ease, and I would have even less of a burden. Zhong Honggu was just killing the chicken to warn the monkey. In the future, in Bailiang, favors are favors, and rules are rules. If anyone uses favors to break the rules with me, I will have them pack up and scram. This time when I return to Bailiang, I will first go to the desert in the west and win over the hundreds of thousands of sinners who can mount and fight. After that, I will travel all over Bailiang's territory. I don't believe that I can't walk through Liangjiang Lake and Beimang before I can walk through my own Bailiang. Su Xiao nodded with gratification and continued to drink. Su Xiao swallowed the last mouthful of strong liquor and shook the empty flask. He said softly, "When we arrive in Bailiang, don't be in a hurry to win over the sinners' forces supported by Mount E. Accompany me to take a look at the Bailiang cavalry first, okay?" Su Fengnian bit his lip and smiled. How can a father always ask his son if he's okay? Su Xiao threw the flask into the lake and also smiled. How can a father repeatedly ask his son to go out and take risks? Su Xiao put his hands in his sleeves and looked up at the sky. He narrowed his eyes and said, "Last time, I might have been busy killing people along the way and didn't feel it. Now I know that the south is cold to the bone. Father is old." Su Fengnian silently took off his red fox fur hat and pressed it on Su Xiao's head. He gently pulled it down and covered the old man's ears. The old man moved his lips and suddenly turned around. It was as if he didn't want his son to see his old tears and his heroic past. Chapter 875. That woman who had relied on her talent to enter second place on the Rouge commentary board, the young Dejia Wang, was second only to Su Weisheng in the commentary board. However, after she wrote The First Snow in the East Wing, there was no longer any news of her. She was like a clay ox that had sunk into the sea. She no longer had the grandeur that made all the scholars and beauties in the world avoid her. It had to be known that even the Nyang in Tian City had once read The First Snow in the East Wing, and Princess Consort Jingon, who had died for love in Xiangfan City, was the same. On the other hand, the rotten scholar of Liyang felt as if a huge rock had been lifted from his heart. This woman had probably finally stopped using words to harm the world. Only the Wang family on Mount Laozhan of the Spring God Lake knew that in the past 2 years, their young Mrs. Mind had not been on Mount Laozhan. No matter the wind or rain, no matter how heavy the snow was, she would go to the lakeside tea house to sit for a while. She would look to the east and the north without a fixed number. In the past, whenever their young miss was unhappy, she would play polo and play on the swing for a while. The swing could be as high as a 2-story building. Even the most daring men would be speechless when they saw it. But it was different now. She was reserved and always sat on the swing in a daze. Occasionally, when she realized that the swing was not moving, she would gently stand on her tiptoes. Many people in the world were looking forward to it, but Miss just ignored them. Especially now that it was winter, she talked about hibernation and slept until she was old. Other than going to the lakeside to look into the distance, she would go back to the study and read a few pages of a book. Then she would mumble that she was sleepy. The maid would grind and hand her a brush, and then she would find all kinds of excuses to be lazy. Was this still the Wang Dongxiang who dared to boast? Before I pick up the brush, I go to see the sages, immortals and Buddhas. After I pick up the brush, the wind is clear, the moon is clear, and the ghosts and deities come to worship me. Was this still the Wang Dongxiang who dared to boast? Before I pick up the brush, I go to see the sages, immortals and Buddhas. After I pick up the brush, the wind is clear, the moon is bright, and the ghosts and deities come to worship me. Fortunately, the old master who had earned a lot of money did not care about these things. Even if there were noble families of equal status who came to propose marriage, he would still refuse them one by one. In the dusk of Mount Mao, some people went down the mountain while others went up the mountain. The one who went down the mountain and boarded the ship was the richest man in Qingzhou, Wang Linquan, who had recently withdrawn from the salt and iron business behind the scenes. His eyes were brimming with tears and he was extremely excited. The one who left the ship and went up the mountain was a gray-haired young master. Unknowingly, he came to Wang Chudong's boudoir. When a maidservant saw the man with clear eyes, she did not know why her annoyance disappeared. However, it seemed that he was not like this in the past. At that time, he was wearing a white robe and a jade belt, elegant and elegant. That pair of red phoenix eyes gave people the feeling that they were filled with water. Any unmarried woman who saw him would tremble a few times. Now that she saw him again, this maidservant intuitively felt that he had changed a lot. As for what had changed, she did not know. It was just that the steward who led the way had told her that the young miss was still lazily hibernating. When the steward arrived at the gate of the courtyard, he respectfully turned back. He did not say much, but the maidservant clearly saw that when the steward was secretly sizing up the young master, the fear in his eyes was like a mouse seeing a cat. It was like a mouse seeing a tiger. When he arrived at the warm and comfortable hall, there were only 3 maidservants in the building. The other 2 also followed the sound with light footsteps. When they saw him, they were surprised to see him. He asked for a pot of spring spirit lake tea that did not have the smell of miscellaneous earth and wood. He brewed the tea himself and did not bother the maidservants. Even if the tea was often of little value, it was fragrant and clean. He did not forget to pour a cup for each of them. This made the several young girls, who were used to being close to each other, feel flattered. However, his tea brewing technique was clumsy and immature. Even if it was not bad, in the eyes of the 3 girls, they did not dare to point out. After drinking the tea, the young guest looked at the sky. A clever maidservant said that she was going to wake up the young miss. He asked if they could wait in the room. The 3 girls looked at each other and then smiled knowingly and nodded. Chapter 876. Su Fengnian, who was passing by Mount Lao to rest, gently pushed open the door and entered. A servant girl helped to close the door, and then she quietly retreated. Su Fengnian sat by the window. The afterglow of the sun shone through the window screen. Unlike the splendor of Mount Lao, this woman's boudoir was very simple and elegant. Other than the 4 treasures of the study, there were not too many miscellaneous items on the table. There was a linglong, carved from an old bamboo root. Large bamboo balls encased small bamboo balls. There were about 8 or 9 balls of varying sizes. Su Fengnian's finger pressed on the linglong and moved it a few cun on the table. The sound was not loud. There was a stack of small colored paper on the table. The colors were different. There were apricot red, goose yellow, and copper green. On the top of the colored paper were 3 crooked characters. Hui Huang Ji. The last time Su Fengnian left Mount Lao, He found out that this Wang Dongxiang's talent and learning had seized the top spot in the literary circle. But the words he wrote did not seem to be of any use. Today, seeing it with his own eyes, he found out that it was really earthworms that had crawled on it. It was an unsightly sight. However, the handwriting on the small exquisite paper under the Hui Huangji was still ugly. There were many broken lines and broken poems, all of which could not be underestimated. There were powerful military poems about the frontier fortress. There were also words about a hermit's bitter recitation. On the contrary, there were very few words of hidden bitterness in the boudoir. Yanji's official ranking was only based on the women's beauty. The men all had their own preferences. There were many objections to the 10 people on the ranking list. Many people said that the famous courtesan Li Baisher's ranking was too low. Others said that they had never seen that girl surnamed Nangong, so how could she have the qualifications to be ranked above Chen Yu? Yanji's assistant ranking was a lot fairer. Bailiang's Junju Su Weisheng, Chun Shin Lake's Wang Chudong, and the female scholar Yen Donggu, who was already the crown prince's imperial concubine, could all be considered to be on the ranking list. There were not many objections. Su Fengnian flipped through the colored paper one by one. When he finished, the order was reversed. He flipped through it again, and the Hui Huangji returned to the front page. After folding more than 60 colored papers, Su Fengnian leaned back in his chair and looked out the window. On Chun Shin Lake, Shenyuan Qingfeng was ruthless. In one day, he killed 6 martial artists in succession. They were all famous Jianghu seniors and had almost become the common enemy of Jianghu. On the next day, no one went up the arena. On the third day, 3 famous Jianghu masters went up the arena one after another. Again, their heads were smashed by Shenyuan Qingfeng. This kind of Wulin Alliance's chief made people's hair stand on end. He was definitely not the Wulin Alliance that Jianghu people admired. However, Mount Huishan's Niu Dagong became famous because of this. Strangely, the more ruthless Shenyuan Qingfeng's methods were, the more the Jianghu people's curses were not one-sided. The old and new Jianghu people's perceptions were completely different. The old Jianghu people were heartbroken, while the new Jianghu people were eager to give it a try. In private, undercurrents were surging. They all said that only such a cold-blooded woman, such a chief, could have the hope of leveling Mount Zhulu. Su Fengnian did not know what Jianghu would look like in the future. Su Fengnian's thoughts drifted away. He thought of the fox fur coat that he had taken from Bailiang to the south at Shangyin Academy. If she had made up her mind, she would never have left the fox fur coat behind. But since she was unwilling to be a caged bird, Su Fengnian could only pretend to be magnanimous and go with the flow for once. If he had the chance to meet her again in the future, he wondered if she would have already become an old woman. Su Fengnian also thought of the first time he walked the Jianghu. At that time, he was at the bottom of the Jianghu, looking up at the Jianghu. There was once an unforgettable figure by the Luo River, but now she had long since faded away. The second time, he was looking down at the Jianghu from above. Su Fengnian turned his head and looked at the bed. That year, when he accompanied her on the lake to ride a turtle, Su Fengnian had never thought that today's situation would occur. He really did go to Beimang and survived. In the future, he would follow the traditional order of succession and rule over Bailiang. He would take over Su Zhao's family property and continue to draw a circle around the prison, guarding the northwest gate. The afterglow of the sun dimmed, and the twilight gradually deepened. A slap came from the bed. The young woman slapped her face hard. Her eyes were drowsy, and her face was full of shame and anger. She sat up. It turned out that countless charcoal had been used to lay the floor of the boudoir. Although the room was as warm as spring and winter, it also gave the mosquitoes the ability to hibernate and survive the winter. It was extremely annoying. The woman was fond of sleeping, and every time she had to scheme against the winter mosquitoes. The maid could not wake her up because these mosquitoes had done a great job. After the woman sat up wrapped in the embroidered quilt, she bared her fangs and brandished her claws. She chased after a winter mosquito that bit her. Resentfully, she returned without success. She could not bear the cold outside the quilt and muttered that there was actually a mosquito in the world that could escape from this heroine's lynxy finger. Then she went back to sleep with her head covered. She probably felt that it was not good to be so dispirited, so she hid in the quilt and muttered for a long time. Finally, she poked her head out and looked at the study table where the light was the brightest. It was empty, and the young girl was a little absent-minded. Some unspeakable grievances appeared in her limpid eyes. She stretched out 2 fingers and pinched her cheeks hard. Only after a moment of pain did her sleepiness disappear. She absent-mindedly got up and put on her clothes. During this time, she shrank back into the warm quilts several times. She was too lazy to wear boots and only put on her socks before she landed on the ground. She finally had the temperament of a great rider, Wang Dongxiang. She was virtuous and graceful, and her eyes were especially lively. She sat cross-legged on the chair, holding her breath and concentrating, grinding and picking up the brush. However, after just one stroke, she was defeated by her own handwriting. She felt that it was really ugly. Her heroic spirit was suddenly gone, and she sighed. Bored to death, she held her chin with one hand and prepared to flip through the colored paper. Suddenly, her eyes widened. On the page of the Huai Huang collection, there was an additional line of small characters. In addition to the current year, month and date, there was also the 4 words, "Here is a tour." Compared to Wang Chudong's handwriting, it was naturally thousands of miles away. Wang Chudong knocked open the door. She did not bother to put on the necessary warm fur coat for going out, nor did she care about the calls of her personal maidservants. In one breath, she ran to the ferry by the lake at the foot of the mountain. Her pair of socks were covered in dirt. Wang Linquan, who loved this only daughter the most, panicked and ran down the mountain, his face full of heartache. Wang Chudong looked at the old man and said with a crying voice, "I will never sleep in the future." Wang Linquan grinned, contrary to common sense, and did not comfort her. Instead, he added insult to injury, "In the future, if you don't know how to manage the household, let's see who dares to marry you." Wang Chudong sniffled and wanted to cry but had no tears. Suddenly, she was pulled under the armpit by someone behind her. She turned around and stepped on the back of that person's shoes. That person smiled and said, "Only I would dare." Chapter 877. In the ink-black night, the 2 carriages drove into an inconspicuous alley. The luxurious and spacious carriage made the alley seem even narrower and narrower. As the base of the Green faction, Xiangfan City was clearly divided between wealth and nobility. Rich nobles like Wang Linquan, because they did not have a family background or scholarly achievements, even if they had a residence in the city, they did not live there for long. Noble nobles like the Lu family, who had a pillar of the country as their family's mainstay, hid in the city with the other families. On the 2 sides of the alley, their residences were almost the same size as the residences of the imperial family. As for Wang Linquan's main gate on Mount Lao, no matter how imposing it was only the residence of a rich family and could not be considered a residence. In this alley, which was called the Sheep Alley by the people of Qingzhou, there were many influential people. Other than the Lu family, the oldest of the 6 assistant ministers of the imperial court, the assistant minister of personnel, Wen Taiyi, and the Qingzhou general, Hong Lingshu, who held the military power of Qingzhou, lived next to each other. It was these 3 influential families of Qingzhou that supported the Green faction, which could compete with the Zhang and Gu factions in the imperial court. Unfortunately, success was due to 3 surnames, and failure was also due to 3 surnames. Following the dissension and discord of Lu Wanhong and the other 2 elders, the Green faction ceased to exist and scattered to other forces. The other influential families also scattered when the tree fell, and each of them found another branch to rely on. It was difficult to unite the people's hearts again. If someone could look closely, they would find that the threshold was in line with the status of the owner of the residence. It was much higher than that of an ordinary family. The rules here were insurmountable. People said that families of equal social status were like carps leaping over the dragon's gate. On the Sheep Alley, the Lu family's residence was the most talked about in the marketplace. When the residence was built, the 2 main gates were directly carved from a tree, which was then made into a door and transported over. Such a huge tree was destined to be too big for 2 people to wrap their arms around. It was said that the threshold of the Lu family's residence was so high that many children had to climb over it. Commoners usually had to take a detour around the sheep house lane. There was no way for them to get close to this alley, so they didn't have the ability to go to the Lu family's front door to investigate. A kind old man with snow-white eyebrows stood at the foot of the steps of the mansion's entrance. He was holding a bamboo lantern, and the candlelight was swaying slightly, illuminating the old man's kind face. 60 years old was already considered old, but the old man was actually 80 years old. Beside him, the eldest legitimate grandson was also almost 40 years old. The man had an elegant appearance and wore a gorgeous 4th-rank brocade official's robe. He was originally an upright official with a good reputation.
However, as the end of the year approached, there were many affairs to attend to. These days, in addition to sitting in the yamen, he also had to visit his superiors and entertain his colleagues in the prefecture. There were also young scholars who came to ask for advice. These were all trivial matters that could not be neglected. Originally, he was supposed to stay up all night to deal with a large pile of thin documents, but the mansion servants informed the old ancestor at the last minute that he had to rush home. Lu Dongjiang, the governor of Taishi Prefecture, had no choice but to rush home without changing out of his official robe. The future head of the Lu family looked at the end of the alley and turned his head to ask his grandfather in a low voice if he could help him carry the lantern.
The old man, who used to be the backbone of the Green Party, shook his head.
The old man did not tell his eldest legitimate grandson, who was coming to visit in the middle of the night.
Lu Dongjiang, who had been afraid of his grandfather since he was young, did not dare to say anything. This kind of reverence continued until Lu Dongjiang, who was known as Lu Zhenkei, was 30 years old. It was only in these 2 years that he went to Taishi Prefecture to become the governor of the prefecture. He could barely be considered an outsider official. Only then did his attitude improve slightly.
He no longer trembled every time the old man asked him face to face, afraid that the old man would look down on him.
No wonder the famous scholar of Qingzhou, Lu Dongjiang, was so unmanly. It was really because his grandfather was too successful and famous. Just the fact that he formed a cabinet with the current Grand Secretary's teacher in the previous dynasty was enough to make people respect him like a god. The Lu family already had 6 generations, but everyone without exception lived under the protection of the old man's achievements. Perhaps only Lu Dongjiang's daughter could talk and laugh freely in front of the old ancestor. The others did not have this kind of courage. After retiring and returning to his hometown, the old man, who still had the title of Pillar of the State, glanced at the mansion across the alley. It was the old man Wen Tai's mansion. Thinking about it carefully, one was in the imperial court while the other was in the wilderness. They had not seen each other for about 4 to 5 years. It was good that they did not meet each other. At least they could maintain a cordial relationship on the surface, unlike Hong Lingshu, who had to lower her head and raise her head constantly. Instead, they went further and further apart, implicating the descendants of the 2 families who had a good relationship with each other. Not long ago, they even had a big fight.
It was to the extent that the matter reached the young vassal king's side.
That young man also knew how to conduct himself.
He did not hesitate to use his status as a vassal king to put on a posture of bearing a bramble and asking for punishment.
You, the lord of Qingzhou, who was watching the fire from the other side of the river, should be punished 50 times. What crime did you commit? To be able to stay in the capital at the age of 70, often working day and night to seek peace for the emperor, he did not feel tired. At this moment, the old man truly felt a little tired. Turning his head to look at the door knocker on the door, Lu Feiqi laughed at himself. He had worked cautiously and conscientiously all his life.
So many times, he had made fearful choices in exchange for this green tin knocker, which was not inferior to that of a duke or marquis.
Chapter 878. Lu Dongjiang saw that his grandfather was in a rare state of decline and became increasingly uneasy. In the past few years of governing Taishi County, he didn't dare to slack off. His interactions with people were flawless. Currently, the imperial court was bold and decisive, and the imperial examinations were being promoted.
Many of the scholars who had been his teacher and student had passed the imperial examinations.
While Lu Dongjiang was searching his heart, the old man suddenly raised the lantern in his hand and softly said, "There is a saying that, the more you work, the more vulgar it becomes. It means that once the work is too complicated and loses its original flavor, going too far is as bad as falling short. Being a person is also a principle. No one loathes a smooth and slick person, but no one can sincerely become close friends with such a person, much less share trials and tribulations with them.
If you want to get along well with someone, you have to know 1 or 2 embarrassing things about that person.
Only then will you feel comfortable and at ease. In Taishi County, it's not that you didn't do well, it's that you did too well. You already outshone the trees in the forest. Our Lu family's eldest granddaughter-in-law isn't a bad person. Although she comes from a small family, after coming here, she was able to manage the household with integrity. She doesn't like you to be a womanizer, which is human nature. If you are willing to treat her with respect, that is a good thing. But because of this, you refuse to engage in social engagements, which is incompatible with the entire officialdom.
Do you really think that with that little bit of reputation on the surface and 1 or 2 myriad people umbrellas when you leave office, you will be able to step on others and be promoted? You may believe that you are a good official and have a clear conscience, but your father left early. Your several uncles are also disappointing. Grandfather has helped them for most of my life, but they still haven't been able to stand up. Don't talk about putting in effort. Just not being a burden is already not easy. Since you will be the head of the family in the future, it will be inevitable that you will have to act like the screen wall behind the E-sect, acting independently and blocking all filth for this family.
You can't take things for granted like today.
The old man, who rarely spoke at length with his descendants, paused for a moment, his expression bleak.
Lu Dongjiang's face was deathly pale.
In the middle of winter, sweat poured down his back. The back of his official robe was soaked with sweat. Before seeing the carriage, one could smell the hooves of the horses.
Lu Feiqi sighed softly and said, "Officials protect each other."
These words don't sound nice, but it shows the true meaning of being an official. Now, the 3 families of the Green Party are like fire and water. Not only are they pursuing their own futures, but they also look down on each other. How can they go far? In this game of chess in Qingzhou, Grandpa is already powerless to reverse the situation. He has already obtained all the benefits that he should have obtained. It is very difficult to snatch anything from Wen Taiyi and Hong Lingshu's pockets. If Grandpa can't do it, you guys can't snatch food from the tiger's mouth either. But Grandpa can still do one thing before he dies, and that is to take you to another chessboard and sit down. There are not many pieces there, and there is a lot of space. It is not like the old chessboard, where every little thing is fought over. Even if the Lu family is not strong enough, the Lu family's descendants will not starve to death. Lu Dongjiang once had a secret meeting with the old man and Bailiang's Chu Lushan on the Spring God Lake. Although he did not participate in the conversation, with his wisdom, he was able to grasp the clues. Moreover, Lu Chengyan secretly returned to Bailiang. It was just that Lu Dongjiang did not want to think too deeply about it. Not to mention the hardships of Bailiang, the key point was that it was like a pile of eggs. Lu Dongjiang was born in peace and was used to a peaceful life. Even if his daughter could become a concubine of a feudal lord, he did not feel any glory. A moment of joy in exchange for the execution of his entire family. Lu Dongjiang was so scared that he woke up in the middle of the night several times, but he did not dare to question his grandfather's decision. As the sound of horse hooves became clearer and clearer, Lu Dongjiang gathered his courage, gritted his teeth and said, "Grandpa, on the old chessboard, even if the Lu family was declining day by day, they could still hope that a national player would appear in the future to take back their lost land. But on that chessboard that may collapse someday, no matter who the Lu family's chess player is, they will only end up losing the game. Do you really want to change it?" Lu Feiqi narrowed his eyes. Lu Dongjiang was sweating profusely, but he did not dare to wipe it away. After he said what was on his mind, his imposing manner was greatly reduced. He lowered his head and said, "It is my fault." The old man, who had never thought that he would smile in front of his eldest grandson, would laugh heartily for the first time. He patted Lu Dongjiang's shoulder and said, "Dongjiang, Grandpa has waited for this day for many years." Lu Dongjiang suddenly raised his head, his face full of disbelief. Lu Feiqi looked at the dim alley of sheep houses at the end and said with gratification, "Blindly worshipping the past is not good. It is the same as writing poems and being a person. If you don't even have the courage to say no to Grandpa in this lifetime, Grandpa will be very disappointed when he closes his eyes. The reason Grandpa favors Yen is because she is smarter and more tactful than all of you. She knows when to nod and when to shake her head. Grandpa has been in the 3 ministries in the capital all his life and has been kneeled to by so many people. Many of them are now ministers of the 6 ministries. How many words of flattery have Grandpa heard? If he goes to the capital, even Bai Yen will treat him with respect. How can Wen Taiyi and Hong Lingshu compare to your grandpa? Not to mention that one of them has to wag his tail and beg Zhang Julu for pity. When a person eats too much bird's nest and shark's fin, inadvertently eating a home-cooked dish will only increase their appetite. But then again, at Grandpa's age, it is inevitable that his eyesight is blurred. If you ask who is standing 50 steps away, Grandpa will definitely not be able to answer. But when looking at the current situation, Grandpa should be more far-sighted than you. Besides, my gambling skills and luck have always been good. This is my last bet. The heavens will give me some face." The depression that had accumulated in Lu Dongjiang's heart for many years disappeared,
and he was in high spirits. The old man smiled and said, "A fine bird chooses a good tree. I'm afraid that the tree is not reliable and changes its allegiance. I'm afraid that the building will collapse. But the atmosphere in Baelyong doesn't look like it is about to decline. It is clearly a situation where the family is becoming more and more prosperous. In the past, the branches were strong and the branches were weak, so it was not easy to climb up to them. But now, the main branch is gradually growing stronger." When Grandpa was on his way back to his hometown, he discussed the world situation with a person surnamed Huang. He said that as long as the family could withstand 2 consecutive trips to the capital, it was worth it for outsiders to bet all their assets. Grandpa deeply agreed with this, which led to tonight's meeting and the subsequent departure of the Liu family from their hometown. The descendants of the Liu family are both good and bad. In the future, there will definitely be people who will rush to Baelyong to take root and become arrogant because of Yen Er's status. As the head of the family, you don't need to restrict them too much. Choose a few members of the Liu family who can't take on important responsibilities and abandon them as pawns. Take the initiative to help the new Prince Liang punish the chickens to warn the monkeys. Baelyong will most likely remember this old favor. If you want the bonsai in the garden to look good, you have to cut it. You have to make a choice. There is no such thing as a good thing in the world that you can't let go of. Lu Dongjiang was both frightened and enlightened. He said, "I will definitely remember this in my heart." The old man, who had been holding the lantern all this time, narrowed his eyes and did his best to look at the carriage that was gradually approaching. His original gentle tone became a little more hurried. Grandpa really hopes that in the future, when there is a political crisis, the Liu family will have an old man like Grandpa who can dispel the fog and give advice to the descendants. This is Grandpa's greatest wish. Lu Dongjiang's expression suddenly changed dramatically. He said sadly, "Grandpa, you're not coming with us to Baelyong?" The old man sighed and finally slowly handed the lantern in his hand to his grandson. He smiled and said, "The Liu family has a new master, but someone has to give the old master an explanation. What is started must be finished. This is also a kind of sacrifice. Besides, it's the Qingming festival, and the tomb is empty. It's not right." Lu Dongjiang took the lantern, which was actually light, but it was as heavy as 10,000 caddies. After the old man handed the lantern over, he seemed to be both disappointed and relieved. He didn't turn his head. He just pointed at the eaves of the mansion behind him and said in a low voice, "Remember one thing. When you are under someone else's eaves, it is your duty to lower your head and do things. But don't forget to raise your head and do things. Because this is a duty that we can't abandon from the moment we were born." The old man quietly straightened his back and looked at the king of Baelyong, who was walking down from the carriage. Back then, the young general refused to admit defeat after he had used up all his capital. In order to make a comeback, he begged a group of high-ranking cabinet elders for soldiers and horses. He stood in the torrential rain from dawn to dusk. And he, Lu Feiqi, was one of the cabinet elders back then. The old man, who no longer had a lantern in his hand, slowly closed his eyes with a smile on his face. Lu Dongjiang turned pale with fright. He hurried forward to support the old ancestor of the Liu family, who was falling backward. He immediately burst into tears. The lantern in his hand fell heavily to the ground. The man died and the lantern went out.